Okay, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the January 27th meeting of the Wilmington Board of Selectmen. All members are present. Would you please join us in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, we'll move right into transmitting of Treasury warrants. We have 29, 29A, 30, and 30A, I believe. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? It is unanimous. We have no minutes to approve, so we'll move right into our 7 o'clock appointment. And we want to welcome Jorge Vargas with Green Sauce Incorporated, doing business as Casablanca Restaurant. Good evening. Come on up, please.
Good evening.
Good evening, and in just a minute, I'll give you an opportunity to introduce yourselves, but we want to welcome you here. You are here for a request to obtain a common victual license for the property located at 207 Main Street, Casablanca. So good evening. Thank you for being here. If you don't mind introducing yourself.
My name is Jorge Vargas, and I'll be the general manager.
Okay.
She's my wife.
I'm Mia Munoz. I'm the liquor license holder for Casablanca.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think that there are only 4 or 5 people in the community who haven't asked me when you guys are opening.
Everybody.
Everyone else is curious.
We apologize to the town.
Okay, and so I know we'll get to that in just a couple minutes, but the business at hand is for the common victual license. Mr. Hall, we have recommendations, I believe.
We do. We have a recommendation from the Health Director, Shelley Newhouse. I recommend approval of the application for common victualer's license submitted by Green Sauce Inc., DBA Casablanca Restaurant located at 207 Main Street. We also have a recommendation from the building inspector, Al Spalding. The building department has no issues with issuance of the common victualer's license.
Okay. So in addition to the, we're going to vote on hopefully 2 things tonight. One is for your common victual license, and then immediately following that, we'll take up your entertainment license. But before we do that, is there anything you want to add in terms of what your anticipation of opening is, what your expectations are, what we can expect as a community from your restaurant?
We're expecting, actually today the plumber inspector was there, he signed off.
Okay.
I think tomorrow he's going back to check the gas plumbing. And if I'm not wrong, the contractor say he had the appointment for tomorrow, the inspector on the electricity. And probably next week, we gotta call the building inspector. Once the alarm is ready, the fire chief, so he can come and check it out. So we're thinking 3rd or 4th week of February. I don't wanna say couple weeks and then take more, you know?
Sure.
So that's my guess.
Okay, great. Are there any comments or questions from my colleagues? Mr. McCoy.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to wish you all the best of luck. I'm going to support the common vic tonight, and obviously the entertainment license. And I know a lot of folks have been waiting to hear what's going on. And I hear that you're a husband and wife team.
Yeah.
Well, I owned a restaurant, and it was a husband and wife team. As long as you listen to your wife, you're going to be fine. All right, just want to let you know that.
Other way.
There you go. I don't want to say any more. All right? Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, good.
Anyone else? Okay.
Come on, my shampoo, that wasn't that bad. Come on.
All right, so we'll take up the, if anybody would offer a motion under this appointment. Thank you very much. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion's been made and second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? It's unanimous. And now we'll move on to your entertainment license, and if you could just explain to us and the audience what you plan for entertainment.
We will have 7 TVs on the bar. We will use amplifier, speaker, and satellite music. No live entertainment, no DJ, no karaoke, no anything like that.
Right, so this is just a license for a jukebox, basically?
Yeah.
To play music, okay,
So,
great. And how about hours of operation? Can we expect, or what can we expect days of the week? Do you have any of that stuff plotted out?
Good. Usually it's 7 days a week, 11 a.m. to 10 p.m. Sunday to Thursday. Friday and Saturday is 11 a.m. to 11 p.m.
Great. Any other commentary from my colleagues? Questions? All right. I think everybody's eager to get there. They're gonna skip the questions and hopefully we'll get right to the meal. I'm a big fan of your Barica location. We've gone there for a couple of my birthdays, so we're looking forward to it. I understand you guys had some troubles with the last year's gas explosion, so we're glad that you were able to work through that.
Yeah.
And hopefully, we wish you well moving forward. Much success. I can tell you that my family will be visiting soon. I hope you have a couple high chairs.
Yeah, we will.
All right,
It's a family restaurant, so
good, good.
yeah,
I'm glad.
kids are welcome all the time. So
Okay, be careful what you wish for. All right. Would anybody like to offer a motion under this appointment?
I'll second it.
Motion's been made and seconded. Thank you. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? It is unanimous. Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Our manager's office will be in touch with you, and we wish you the best of luck, and we hope, just repeat it one more time for the audience, we're hoping for sometime the 3rd or 4th week in February. Is that correct?
thank you.
Yes.
Correct.
Okay, all right.
We
Thanks
hope
so
to
much.
make that time.
We hope so. Thank you.
You're not supposed to be using a blue pen on this stuff.
Okay. Couple signatures. There you are. All right, we have no communications this evening, so we'll move into, excuse me, I forgot we weren't just here for Casablanca. I'm sorry, Joe.
Okay.
We, without further ado, will introduce our town manager, Jeff Hall, for our FY '21 budget presentation.
Thank you.
Mr. Hull?
Just waiting for the signatures here, and we'll
Sure.
proceed.
We have copies available for anybody who's in the audience. I take that back. Anybody's welcome to look on with mine.
Good evening, Chairman Greg Bendel and members of the Board of Selectmen, members of the Finance Committee. Not sure if we have any out there. If I apologize if I'm missing anybody. I know John Doherty, our current chair, indicated he was not able to attend tonight, but we will be seeing him tomorrow as we begin the process of discussing the budget presentation, the proposals. I see a number of members of the school committee in the audience. I appreciate your attendance. Dr. Brand, Dr. Regan, Paul Ruggiero, members of the departments, my departments, and some of my staff. Appreciate your attendance, and also I see a representative from Wilmington Tewksbury, Dave Robertson. Thank you for being here, and as the Town Managers Act establishes, the town manager is responsible for presenting an estimate of the revenues and expenditures of the upcoming fiscal year at least 90 days in advance of the upcoming budget. And it is my pleasure to present my 8th annual budget. It's accompanied by the capital improvement document and other supporting documents, and I will highlight the operating budget this evening. The budget that is proposed for fiscal 2021 is $120,817,437. This represents an increase of 3.9% increase of $4,606,989. The chart that you see represents the major categories of expenditures in the budget. The Wilmington schools being the largest share, and they're proposed to see an increase of 4.25%, a little over $1.7 million, followed by shared costs, which are a variety of costs, including various assessments from the state, debt costs, insurances, health insurance, a number of costs in that area. They're the second major category, and the increase there is 5.18%. General government is increasing by 1.92%, and then Shawshene Tech, the assessment from the Shawshene Tech School is estimated to go up 5%. The next slide represents the growth in our revenues and expenditures. As has been the longstanding practice, we continue to estimate revenues very modestly. The vast majority of the local revenue is the local property tax, and has been the practice for many years. The formula there is essentially to increase the existing levy by 2.5%, accompanied by new growth, which we estimate to be about $1.1 million, and then followed by an amount for the excludable debt, which is the high school, gives us a total of a little over $90 million in revenue from the property tax. The next major category of revenue comes from state aid. We are not anticipating a significant increase in state aid in the coming year. There are two major categories, Chapter 70, which is school aid, and the unrestricted general government aid. School aid, we do anticipate going up a little less than $60,000. Again, as many of you know, the governor in November signed the Student Opportunities Act, which is the first major overhaul of the Chapter 70 formula since the 1990s, 1993. The expectation here, the intention is that $1.5 billion in revenue will be directed to the school districts across the state between now and 2026. We're expecting that the vast majority of that, certainly in the early years, is going to be directed to the urban districts. And as a consequence, we're not anticipating a significant increase there. Unrestricted general government aid typically runs very stable, and we're estimating about $26,000 in that category. The third major revenue stream is local receipts, which represents everything from the local meals tax, motor vehicle excise, which is really the predominant category of local receipts, the various permits, licenses, fees, and again, we're expecting that to be very stable, projecting about a $241,000 increase in motor vehicle excise, with the expectation that the economy remains fairly strong and people continue to buy vehicles. Next is the category for schools. You'll see the school department is looking at an increase of $1,782,433. The vast majority of that is due to salaries, which is a combination of step and lane changes, negotiated increases in salaries. There's also a request for additional personnel, 11.25 FTEs, and the vast majority of those FTEs is targeted towards student support services. The proposal includes a board-certified behavioral analyst, special education teacher for the middle school, social worker for the middle school, also 4.5 FTE educational assistants to work with students on individual education plans. And then with respect to the non-salaried category, Professional development is a major category there, as well as transportation and curriculum and supplies. It is noteworthy that the school department recently updated their 3-year strategic plan, which identifies 4 overarching strategic objectives. First being student learning, second, social emotional learning, culture of inclusion, and then safe, secure, and flexible learning environments. To that end, they are directing $75,000 in follow-up to those objectives. With regard to capital, you'll see that there's $831,000 that is targeted for that area, and we'll talk about that further in the presentation. With respect to general government, the increase, as I noted earlier, was 1.92%. The major categories here are the Middlesex retirement assessment, which is going up $513,694. Trash and recycling, this is something that has been of note now for the last 18 months or more. You will recall that there were discussions about the challenges that have impacted not only Wilmington, but communities across the country and in countries around the world with the change in China's policy with respect to receiving recyclables, these commodities, which at one time were the collectors were actually receiving some amount of money for. They are now being charged a tip fee. We have a contract with Russell Disposal. It was initially a 10-year contract. In light of the circumstances that they found themselves in last year, they were looking to get out of the contract. We made arrangements with them in exchange for continuing for an additional year. We would assume the tipping fee for recyclables. And in the meantime, our Public Works Director has issued a bid for new collection services. As expected, this 301-148 reflects the increase in those charges. In addition to that, we are at the end of a 5-year contract with the incinerator in North Andover. They also charge us a tip fee for trash, disposal of trash. That contract, which with the approval at town meeting would be a 5-year contract, and the tip fees will be increased, and it's reflected in that amount. Additionally, I will be looking for staffing increases, and that will be talked about further in the presentation. The amount is just over $270,000. With respect to overtime, you'll recall last year this was a hot topic, so to speak, with regard to the fire department. And in response to that, there were 8 additional firefighters brought on to the department, and we anticipate that will have a major effect on beginning to reduce overtime. The issue at the time was a number of long-term injury cases and the recruiting process that we go through with civil service. I would just note that we are still struggling with several long-term injury cases on the fire department, but we expect to be able to reduce the overtime. On the police side, the situation is somewhat reminiscent of the fire in that we've, between retirements and changing personnel and some injuries, we're experiencing an increase in overtime. We anticipate this year's overtime will actually exceed the budgeted amount, so we're increasing overtime in that department by $50,000. Shawshene Tech, as you know, Wilmington is one of 5 member communities, and the increase here is governed in large measure by the fluctuating enrollments. Billerica is the largest contributor, if you will, of students to the tech, and we are being told that the number of students attending from Billerica is expected to continue to drop. I expect that is in large measure due to the new high school, which also includes an 8th grade. The sense being that 8th graders are perhaps less inclined to leave the new school. We also anticipate increases in Wilmington students going to the tech. They also have some open collective bargaining agreements that will inevitably increase costs there. In terms of the local economy, I think the indicators are that we are still in a strong place. The major developments, residential developments in town are starting to wind down. Green Meadows Drive, Murray Hill, Spruce Farm, McDonald Road. Homes are still being constructed, but they're wrapping those up. In the meantime, we have 50 apartments and commercial space that was approved, slated for 203 Lowell Street. New condominiums at 635 Main Street and 168 Lowell Street are in the permitting stage. We continue to see a regular pace the demolition of existing homes and construction of larger, more expensive homes, which of course adds value to the overall assessed values of properties. 256,649 square feet of warehouse space has been approved on Upton Drive. 400,000 square feet of renovated warehouse space has been approved for 213 Main Street, which is the old Expeditures property. Also, 100 and 110 Fordham Road has been approved for an increase in the height of the building and some site work. They're now in a second round of permitting to add docks and loading docks and make further remediation or renovation rather to their parking area, a redesign of their parking area. And then finally, the restaurant and retail space at the end of Ballardvale at 125 is, as you know, under construction. Analog Devices continues to move aggressively towards completion of their $142.9 million campus expansion. So all those things certainly point to a strong economy, but that goes with some measure of concern. Clearly, we still struggle with vacancies on Main Street, the Main Street corridor. Certainly tonight's news with the permitting of Casa Blanca is good news that that space can be filled. We're still dealing with the vacancy at Rite Aid and the Walgreens area. Also, we received notice recently that CardSmart is moving out. So those remain to be issues, but I would note that the Economic Development Committee, under the great stewardship of Chairman Mike Shampoo, is making efforts to identify ways to encourage retail into Wilmington. And one of the measures that they are currently working on is a survey to seek opinions from residents about the type of retail mix that we should have in the corridor, and the site for that survey is found on your screen there. The revenue stream, as was noted earlier, is in large measure made up of three categories: the local property tax, local aid, and local receipts. One of the things that's noteworthy is that the property tax now takes up almost 75, or provides almost 75% of the revenue to the town. Just a couple of years ago, it was at 71%. It then went to 72, a little over 72. This is really counter to what I think the intentions of the original authors of Proposition 2.5 would have, but it continues to be the case not only in Wilmington but elsewhere. You'll note here that one of the local receipts that has historically been part of the revenue is the sewer receipts. With a vote taken at the May 2019 annual town meeting, an enterprise fund was established. And what that does essentially is that the revenue that is generated through the payment of sewer rates by commercial property owners and residents who have access to sewer all that revenue goes into a fund that in turn pays for the costs associated with sewer service, which principally are the MWRA assessment. We have one employee in the sewer division and some smaller maintenance costs. So that revenue has been taken out of the local revenue, but it is part of an enterprise fund. Next is, under the tax comparison, you'll note that Wilmington's residential rate continues to be favorable to our neighboring communities. This is really a consequence of something that the Board of Selectmen back in the early 80s took advantage of when the state first established a mechanism to change the, shift some of the tax burden. The town of Wilmington took advantage of that and has continued to do so ever since. Some communities have a single tax rate. In Wilmington's case, as I say, from the 1980s on, it's been a dual tax rate. It's noteworthy that 77% of the value of property in the town of Wilmington is made up of by residential properties. But with this shift, essentially a little less than 60% of the tax burden is being paid by the residential homeowner. So the commercial industrial are taking a somewhat of a disproportionate share of the tax burden. One thing that is also noteworthy, looking at the CIP rate, we are the highest of the communities of comparison. We have not seen any visible indications that this is discouraging businesses to come from coming to Wilmington or staying in Wilmington, but I think it is noteworthy to keep an eye on that. With regard to budget expenditures, again, this identifies the major categories of expenditures ranging from municipal education between Wilmington Public Schools and the Shawshene Tech, combined cost, which were referenced before, capital, which we'll be talking about a little bit later on. All of that collectively comprises the $120+ million budget. We're now starting to get into some of the capital requests. The handheld radios, portable radios, on the fire side, we are looking to request $39,000 to replace some of the radios in that department. They are beyond their useful life, some cases difficult to get parts. And with the addition of more personnel to each shift, we also need to have radios for them. So that's $39,000 for that expenditure. The police, we're also looking to replace their handheld radios at 10 years old. Again, warranties are well beyond that time. $91,000 is requested to replace their handheld radios. The schools, as would be expected, is looking to continue to maintain up-to-date and appropriate computers for staff and students. $195,000 is recommended to replace desktops, docking stations, and monitors in pre-K to third grade. Same amount is also requested to replace computers in the high school. $80,000 is recommended for a phased replacement of Chromebooks. The existing Chromebooks, the support is due to expire in 2020. They play a particularly significant role in addition to their daily learning usage. They're also used for the MCAS testing. And then $25,000 is requested for replacement of administrative staff computers. With regard to the town's internal IT operation, we're seeking $100,000 to improve our data backup capabilities, not only in terms of expanding the ability to store information online or in the cloud, so to speak, but also to store it securely. Given this age that we're in, and we're constantly hearing about computer breaches, malware, ransomware cases, we need to make sure that the data we're storing, whether it's tax records, assessing information, financial information, that it's being stored in as secure a manner as possible. We're also looking to change to a Office 365 subscription arrangement. Office 360 offers the suite of applications that are used by many administrative personnel in the town hall and other general government offices. One of the things we learned in the past is that by not upgrading the software on a regular basis, when we did have to make upgrades, one of the challenges was the users trying to accommodate in the learning curve to get up to speed on the new software. So this upgrade will gradually will keep us current with the changes in the Office product. Facilities planning and maintenance. This is going to be a major theme, I think, certainly a major topic of discussion throughout these budget proceedings. The facilities plan that was finalized in January of 2018 talked about a senior center, the need for a senior center, and also included a town school administration building. The senior center, as we all know, is been embraced as a priority, as it should be, by the Board of Selectmen, and I agree that the 1935 Bazell Center has served its purpose, but is in need of, the seniors are in need of a new space there. So the proposal that I'm bringing forward, as was noted in a prior meeting, is requesting $650,000 to be taken from free cash to hire an owner's project manager, which represents the town in terms of the design and construction of a facility. It's required under the procurement law for projects in excess, building projects in excess of $1.5 million that we have in OPM. And then separate from that, we would hire a designer to work with the community and identify a preferred site for the senior center, and then develop a schematic design to site the facility on the particular, at the particular location, establish the square footage, the number of floors, the layout of buildings, all the mechanical systems, HVAC, and ultimately develop a cost estimate, which, when that is done, would put the town in a position to go to a follow-up town meeting for construction funds to actually build that facility. The town school admin, I know, is much less popular, given that we aren't on the front line, so to speak, and our people who work in the town and school admin are kind of the back of house, so to speak, of the operations. This is likely to garner much less support, but I would like to suggest it's a little bit like a couple who years ago bought the Ford Escape, and then over the years they had a family, perhaps 2 or 3 kids. The vehicle isn't quite as accommodating as it once was. It's got 150,000 miles on it. They've had to change out the transmission. The tie rods are gone. They just found out that it doesn't pass its emissions standard. And so the question becomes, at what point do you continue to put more money into that vehicle versus maybe getting something else? And I think that's the situation we're in here. We've got a Roman house building that in its day was certainly an elegant building, built in 1900, but I don't believe that it really accommodates the school administrative services that are provided there. We have a building here which served very well as a elementary school building and has served since 1984 as a town hall. I won't go into all the details of the limitations, but needless to say, in my estimation, it's appropriate to look at a facility that would be a joint facility between the two operations. So to that end, I'm proposing $955,000 to be taken from free cash, simply a similar process to the one outlined with the senior center. We would hire an OPM, hire a designer to work with us to come up with a preferred location and develop a design and ultimately a cost estimate. The expectation is that this process would take a little bit longer than it would with the senior center. So in terms of the timelines, I would expect the senior center to be in a position for construction funding sooner than this town school admin building would be. Continuing to work with the buildings that we have and looking to make them as efficient and as comfortable as possible. We're looking to put funds into the West Intermediate School. One project that's proposed is a lighting project, $100,000 for that, which would continue the work that was already done this fiscal year to replace current incandescent lighting with LED lighting. Aside from reducing the utility bill for the school department, the lighting itself just provides a much more conducive environment for the staff and students. And then separate from that, we've learned recently that changes in the asbestos regulations are going to make it more expensive for us to work with and around encapsulated asbestos. There are encapsulated asbestos tiles, in many cases some floor tiles, and in this case ceiling tiles in the West Intermediate School. We do have individuals on the public building staff who are certified to work with small amounts of encapsulated asbestos. I would note that as long as that material is not disturbed, it's not a health risk. But going forward, the expectation is most instances where tiles are moved will require contractors to come in that are licensed in asbestos, handling asbestos encapsulated materials. As I noted, this could become very expensive anytime we're looking to deal with lighting or cabling above tiles. So the plan is to look for $360,000, which again would be drawn from free cash to bring a licensed contractor in to remove the asbestos encapsulated tiles, dispose of them in an appropriate manner, and replace them with non-asbestos encapsulated tiles. And then finally, in the West Intermediate School, anyone who heads down Carter Lane and accesses the campus there will note that there is a shaft on the far side of the West Intermediate School. That is a so-called lula, or essentially a elevator that provides access for individuals with mobility challenges to get from the first floor to the second floor. That was installed in 2009. And it has run its course. It is not particularly reliable at this point. Parts are hard to get, and so we're looking to replace it for $79,000, either a chairlift type of operation or a lift similar to the one that's in there currently. Additionally, with respect to capital expenditures, the Wildwood Cemetery, a couple of things here that we're looking to take on. First, to continue to expand within the existing layout of the cemetery, adding new graves and monument foundations in sections of the cemetery referenced as sections O and P. This will add capacity to the cemetery. The cost is $40,000. We're also cognizant of the fact that we have about 15 more years of available space in the cemetery before it is occupied, so to speak. In an effort to try to extend the ability to accommodate people there, we're looking to acquire a property from a budding property owner, and we'll be seeking to pursue conversations to that end, and I'm seeking $450,000 from free cash for that purpose. With regard to public works vehicles, we are seeking to replace a sweeper. We have 2 sweepers in the fleet, so to speak, that are responsible for the roads throughout town. This particular sweeper is a 2009 mechanical sweeper, and we would be looking to replace that at a cost of $280,000. We're seeking to replace a 2005 heavy-duty dump truck at a cost of $178,000, replacing a 2007 3/4-ton pickup truck for $43,000, 2007 heavy-duty 1-ton truck for $85,000. Also, in the fire department, we're looking to replace a couple of, upgrade one vehicle, replace another, $32,000 to retrofit a 2008 F-350, which is used for brush fires and to access areas that are not accessible with the other fire apparatus. And then $52,700 to replace a 1996 3500 with a Ford F-250 vehicle. This is a support vehicle that in instances where a particular scene requires additional personnel or equipment that the responding apparatus cannot accommodate, this vehicle serves that purpose. With regard to police vehicles, we're looking for $190,000 to replace 2 frontline cruisers. 2 vehicles would be purchased for the Detective Bureau. These would be mid-sized sedans as opposed to the conventional SUV that you see out there. And then funds to upgrade an existing vehicle for the police chief to change out the vehicle that he's in, which is currently a 2012 vehicle. We have a regular replacement schedule for the school minivans. This minivan that's slated to be replaced is 2011, and the cost for the replacement is $56,000. Next is a very important component of the public safety operations, and that is the central dispatch. There's 2 major expenditures requested here. The arrangement that they work in right now, they're on an elevated platform. There's 3 consoles with various computer screens and communications apparatus that they're working with, and that underneath that raised floor, if you will, is the network of cables and various wiring that allows them to communicate readily between police and fire and vice versa. That flooring is original to the building. There's some weaknesses in the floor, some rusting, and the request is for $194,000 to replace the flooring. This is, as you can imagine, a bit of a logistical issue. We will be working through the police and fire departments to bring in a portable mobile unit that would be stationed outside of the public safety area in the parking lot there, so that when this work is being done, the consoles would be relocated into this public safety dispatch unit, and they would essentially function in that fashion until the new flooring is installed. There's also upgrades to furniture, ergonomically appropriate furniture. This operation, as you know, runs 24/7, 365 days a year. and so that's $194,000. In addition to that, the network that allows for communication between dispatch and fire, dispatch and police, police and fire between each other, is made up of a series of radio communication devices and antennas spread around town, amplifiers that are located at high points in Wilmington. Some of those are not as secure as they should be. Many of these devices need to be replaced because of their age. Also, we're operating on an analog basis. Public safety has started to move to a digital basis for some years now. And so the recommendation here is for $450,000, which would be the first of a three-phased process to upgrade our communication system. We have police officers and firefighters out in the field, so to speak, that rely upon the portable radios that we talked about earlier. They also have mobile devices in their vehicles, and they need to be able to communicate quickly and reliably with each other. One of the issues that we've seen here is that some of the wiring that allows for this communication is old copper wiring that is owned by Verizon. They no longer maintain this copper wiring, and in fact, it creates a vulnerability for us. We had a situation not too long ago where the police radios were disabled because of a problem here, and they had to borrow fire portables until we were able to get someone to make repairs. So that's certainly not a position we want to be in. We want to also create some redundancy in the system so that a failure in one portion of the network doesn't disable everything, so that we are also looking to include microwave antennas as another mechanism to ensure reliability. $450,000 is requested, and it would be proposed to be taken from free cash. The Shawshene tennis courts and basketball courts. If you've been out there recently, as I have, you'll note that there's a fair amount of cracking of the courts. It's actually become more significant over time. Unfortunately, this is an issue that we run into in various locations. The first response that the DPW initiates is crack sealing, which is intended to really prolong the life of the courts. We've done that now for some time with the Shawshene courts, and we're at a point where that no longer is viable. So I am looking to take $40,000 from the Recreation Revolving Fund to pay for the design of full reconstruction of the basketball and tennis courts, with the expectation that next year I would be looking for approximately $360,000 for the full reconstruction of the basketball and tennis courts. In addition to that, we are continuing our efforts to extend sidewalks, really starting from Glen Road down Lawrence Street, which has already been done, along Shady Lane, and ultimately out to Middlesex Ave. This would be phase 4 of this project for $50,000 to extend sidewalks further along Shady Lane. We would expect, if this appropriation is authorized, that we would have one more phase, if you will, and then be done with the sidewalks in this area of town. The facilities plan that you recall was developed in 2018 talked about, there was a plan that was actually put forward by former Superintendent Joanne Benton that called for consolidation of the schools, mothballing the Wildwood and the Boutwell, and essentially moving grades into the remaining 4 buildings. It appears at this point that plan is no longer in favor, and certainly there's valid reason for that. Other things come to mind. But there's no question that we need to deal with our schools, the elementary schools. It is a bit of a Rubik's Cube in terms of trying to figure out what options to take. Every decision on one school affects other schools. Should there be grade reconfiguration? Should schools be expanded or renovated or completely new construction? There's no question that the Wildwood School is the most pressing of the schools. It was even noted in the Cecil report that the Wildwood School is the oldest of the schools and in poor condition. To that end, it's based upon my discussions with Superintendent Brand and his staff. The recommendation is for $200,000 to hire a firm who is well-versed in working with communities in a similar situation who have multiple schools that require either significant reconstruction or perhaps replacement, to develop a more global plan for dealing with those schools. The expectation is that we are going to need MSBA funding to make this work, and in my estimation, to be able to submit a program or a proposal for a school replacement and show them that it's part of a larger, well-thought-out plan would make our application far more competitive than simply doing one-offs. So the plan would be to have a firm come in and work with the school committee, work with the town to solve the Rubik's Cube riddle, if you will, of how we deal with the schools. In the meantime, separate from that and parallel to that would be getting counsel from this firm as to how to best deal with the more immediate pressing issue of providing space for students and staff at the Wildwood School. Clearly, any facilities that are going to be constructed are going to take several years. We don't have several years with the Wildwood School. As much as the Public Buildings Department has done an amazing job keeping the building clean, keeping the heat running to the greatest extent possible, given the circumstances, there's no question that the Wildwood School needs to be addressed sooner rather than later. The cost for that would be $200,000. Debt continues to decline in large measure with the high school project. The debt is declining, and we're in the process of paying off some of our debt. Certainly that's, in one respect, a good thing, but it's also, in my estimation, advisable to fill in, so to speak, debt as it's declining so that we don't have sharp spikes in debt where we suddenly have to ratchet up the borrowing to address projects. It's generally accepted that communities borrowing between 2 to 6% of debt as a part of the operating budget is acceptable. It also demonstrates to the rating agencies when a community has a measure of debt that they are mindful of needing to invest and reinvest in their infrastructure and their buildings. So I would expect that clearly as we go forward and address some of these building issues, we are going to need to borrow. Certainly we have other reserves that we can use in various manners, but debt is ultimately going to be part of the program. In 2018, the town hired the Collins Center to perform a financial review of the town's operations. And one of the recommendations that was made, and I'm very appreciative of the fact that the Board of Selectmen endorsed this recommendation, was the consolidation of our financial departments, Treasury Collections, assessing and accounting under the auspice of a finance director. Brian Perry has been with us a little over 6 months, and I have to say it's a great add to the team. He has, aside from overseeing these departments, taken on the very challenging and quite frankly complicated task of moving us off of the SoftWrite financial system onto Munis. The chart of accounts, which was really the foundation of that transition, if you will, has been completed. It is working along with staff from the school department and financial folks from our end to transition information over to Munis so that our general ledger and accounts payable can be ready to go online as of July 1 of this coming year. In addition to that, we are also mindful of continuing to evaluate our policies. And to that end, one of the things that I believe is appropriate for us to pursue is the retirement, so to speak, of our pension liability, unfunded liability debt. And to that end, we're looking to continue to make advance payments with the expectation that when we can retire that pension liability debt, we can redirect those funds that would otherwise be going for that purpose to add to our OPEB, to offset our OPEB liability. So that's certainly one policy area that I'm recommending that we'll continue to evaluate. OPEB, as noted here, we need to continue to pay that down. With respect to how we use some of our reserves, this is another area which I believe requires ongoing focus. Free cash, in my estimation, first and foremost should be used as a rainy day fund. I know I sound like a broken record, but there will be a time when it rains, and we want to be prepared to avoid the catastrophic circumstances of having layoffs and major cuts in services. So that's point one with regard to free cash. I also think it's a means for funding smaller types of capital projects, infrastructure projects, and these aren't hard and fast numbers, but projects in the range of $300,000 to $1.5 million. And then another means or another tool that free cash can be used for is to retire existing debt. With respect to capital, in my estimation, the capital stabilization account should be used for larger scale expenditures for building and infrastructure projects, projects that exceed $1.5 million. And again, these aren't hard numbers, but I think worth considering. And then finally, borrowing is another category, another tool that we should be using for the larger scale projects. We will continue to evaluate these policies, looking to establish some measure of consistency in terms of how our reserves are used. Continuing the discussion about some of our liabilities, you will see that our OPEB liability, while it has declined to some measure, is still at a significant level at over $103 million. Once again, this I believe is the 6th year that we'll be looking to direct $1 million towards the OPEB, which is the Other Post-Employment Benefits Trust Fund, and the amount here will be used towards offsetting the OPEB liability. Pension liability, one of the things that we're changing here in the past, we have split funds, some money going towards the retirement stabilization account, and some funds going towards prepayment of the pension liability. The stabilization account, you'll recall, is intended to be available for years when our retirement assessment spikes dramatically and we don't have the ability within the operating budget to cover that cost. It's my belief at this point that given the balance in that stabilization account, we don't need to add to it, so that the $500,000 that we put in there last year, I'm suggesting that be directed to the prepayment of our unfunded liability. So 1.5 going fully to a prepayment. Capital stabilization, last year we put $4 million in there. This year I'm suggesting $2 million that would come from free cash. That would bring us up to about $16 million, which certainly is a healthy amount of money. But again, when you look at the total capital projects out there, the number here references 85 million. For those of you who recall last year's number, it was 143 million, but that number actually included $97 million, which was the number estimated by the CISO group for dealing with the consolidation process. So I'm not including that in this number, but I think that it still bears being aware that there are going to be significant costs in excess of this $85 million to pursue whatever route we pursue with regard to the schools. With respect to personnel, you'll recall last year it was my recommendation that the police department, 4 additional patrol officers be added to the department. The demand for service, calls for services have increased. It's been, I believe, 2008 or 9, thereabouts, since the last time police personnel were added. Calls for service have continued to go up since that time. Circumstances haven't changed in a year. At the time, those funds for the officers were redirected to the fire department. It's my recommendation this year that we take a phased approach of adding 1 patrol officer and 1 sergeant this coming year, and the same in the following year. Additionally, we're currently fortunate to have a recovery coach, which was funded through a grant. That grant is due to expire in August. This person works closely with our wellness coordinator, and it's my expectation that by funding this fully from the town appropriation, 16 hours a week, it will continue to assist her in her efforts. Dispatch. Dispatch was the last time there was an increase in dispatch personnel was in 2003. Since that time, if you compared the number of calls in the dispatch center today versus then, they've dramatically increased. In addition, one of the 12 individuals that serve in that role is the dispatch supervisor. Early on, for most of those years, up until recently, that dispatch supervisor essentially spent the bulk of their time behind the console, fielding calls, directing information to emergency response personnel. More recently, though, it's become quite apparent that there are requirements to make sure that our dispatch center is in compliance with the regulatory department that governs dispatch centers, that the personnel are receiving the appropriate continuing ed training. And so this, the supervisor has really been redirected to perform some of those more administrative roles and is not able to perform the same level of coverage that they have in the past. So one dispatcher is recommended for this position at a cost of $43,056. And then with regard to human resources, the level of activity and the responsibilities associated with human resources has continued to grow. Many communities of our size have separate HR departments with an HR director and one or two individuals that serve in that role. There's been a significant amount of hiring, people retiring, and we're expecting that to continue for the foreseeable future. Right now, those responsibilities are taken on by several different people. Our payroll benefits person assumes some of those roles. Payroll, we're coming to find out, is a full-time job in and of itself. The assistant town manager, HR director does a lot of this work, as does our Wendy Martinello, who's here this evening, is responsible for a lot of the recruiting and efforts to work with departments to onboard people. So the position is recommended at $60,000. It's an HR generalist. Some of the things that they would be dealing with are the various requirements associated with the Affordable Care Act, COBRA, making sure that when individuals retire, that whether it's the math teachers' retirement or the Middlesex County retirement, receive the appropriate information so that their insurance continues on. And then one final category we have had for quite some time in the Elderly Services Department, an Elderly Services Assistant. This position has been funded from the Mass Department of Elder Affairs, and I'm proposing to increase the hours from 30 to 35, and also to pay for half of the cost associated with this position, which would be $17,904. This would do a couple of things for us. It would increase the amount of time that this individual is available to work with the seniors. It would also free up some of the grant funds for other types of programming that could be done by Elderly Services. This is a reflection of the capital improvement plan. I would note that that is a crucial part of the documents that have been presented to the Board of Selectmen and will be presented to the Finance Committee. Again, it outlines what we forecast in the next 5 years. Certainly, things will change. There will be inevitably projects that will be pushed out, perhaps projects that we don't foresee right now that will be added or moved forward. I do, in this particular slide, reference the amounts that were originally identified in the Cecil study. Not so much that I expect those to necessarily play out as they were envisioned, but to note the fact that there are going to be costs associated with the north, the west, the Woburn Street, and the Shawshene schools. So I would suggest that we are at a crossroads of sorts. It's clear that there are many options to pursue regarding which schools are addressed, in what order, and how, whether efforts are made to reduce transitions with respect to general government buildings, which to replace, which to retain, and how much to invest in aging, and I would submit inadequate buildings. Aside from addressing the existing buildings, there's also the need to be attentive to other issues that are on the front burner. The fire substation, which is clearly a priority, and while it is not budgeted for in this fiscal year, that's only because we've not been able to identify any viable sites. We will certainly be continuing to look at options. As you may recall, there was property that was identified off of Route 125, which is a highly desirable location. It's Article 97 property, which would be very difficult to remove from protected custody, if you will. It would have to be replaced by property of the same amount in another location. So that is certainly a remote possibility, but I don't see that as something in the immediate future. The other option that we're looking at is conversations with private property owners about property in the North Wilmington corridor. Aside from that, there's also a real desire to pursue an ice rink, which is, again, it's not something we're funding at this point in time, but something that there's been a need expressed out there that will have to be addressed in some manner. One thing that is clear, that is that we cannot tackle all these projects at once. The town does not have the bandwidth from a financial resources standpoint to deal with all these projects without considerable stress on the operating budget, service cuts, or possibly overrides. A dialogue will need to continue to reach consensus on a path forward. There will be disagreement on the approaches, and that should be the case. Approaches should be tested in a constructive manner. I would just suggest that the idea that local officials are out for personal gain, as has been suggested on social media, is simply unproductive and untrue. Before I conclude, I would just like to read my concluding comments here. I wish to acknowledge current and prior members of the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee for endorsing the approach that has been taken toward the preparation of the annual financial plans over the past many years, which have fostered healthy financial reserves. Most seasoned personal financial planners emphasize the importance of individuals maintaining strong financial reserves that can sustain them during periods of job loss, major illness, or other unanticipated major expenses, in addition to setting funds aside for retirement, child's tuition, or significant planned expenses such as the addition to a home. The same holds true for municipalities. Reserves should be established to sustain operations during unanticipated changes in the economy, major unanticipated expenses to repair buildings or reconstruct heavily traveled roadways. As with individuals, cities and towns must set money aside to address future obligations. For Wilmington, some of those obligations are addressing the town's schools and general government buildings. Just as the community made the commitment to invest in a middle school and public safety building 20 years ago, and more recently invest in a high school, the community must once again come together in support of the next round of replacement or expansion of public buildings. Many may disagree with the need for a facilities plan, the approach taken in developing the plan, or even the specific recommendations for sequencing of projects and reconfiguration of elementary schools and grades. But the underlying point should not be in dispute. Wilmington has multiple aging facilities with a variety of shortcomings that over time will only become more pronounced and more expensive to address. The time is now to begin the next phase of investing in the community's public buildings, developing a coherent plan that addresses the approach to deal with specific facilities, the location of new facilities, and the sequencing of these facilities that garners consensus amongst elected officials and residents is the first step. These actions, combined with phased and judicious use of reserves coupled with financial assistance from the state and borrowing, will provide a way forward. Additionally, providing a greater measure of certainty with respect to the intentions for town facilities will enable officials to make decisions about existing buildings that merit significant investments in roofs or window replacements, for example. Buildings expected to remain for the foreseeable future may warrant major expenditures, while buildings slated for replacement in the next 5 years may not warrant those same expenditures. The facilities discussion will take place within the context of deliberations about other major expenditures to replace and fortify the communication infrastructure for public safety and other departments, constructing a public safety building, upgrading roads, developing procedures for the acceptance of unaccepted ways, expanding the cemetery, expanding the sidewalk network, determining the best approach to providing reasonable ice time that is predictable and adequate for the needs of the high school and the youth hockey teams. In closing, I extend a sincere thanks to all the individuals who come to work for the town of Wilmington every day with a commitment to serve, and the volunteers who serve on boards and commissions with no expectation of remuneration. While some may be applauded for the roles they play and the responsibilities thrust upon them, many are behind the scenes playing the unique role to ensure that the services expected are the services provided, and whenever possible, service expectations are exceeded. Your dedication to the community is does not go unnoticed. The conclusions of this budget presentation now begin the process of debate and deliberation of the merits of the expenditure plan presented in the operating budget and supplemental document, including the capital budget. The operating budget is an honest and deliberate effort to recommend the funding of goods and services that will meet the expectations of the residents we serve. There will be inevitable and legitimate differences of opinion and approaches and priorities. In the words of Abraham Lincoln, quote, "You cannot escape the responsibility of tomorrow by evading it today," end quote. In the end, we must make our decisions based upon our best judgments. I look forward to engaging in the discussion with the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee. Meetings with the Finance Committee begin tomorrow evening and will continue on Tuesday and Thursday evening through February before concluding in March. I trust that after reasoned discussion and careful consideration, we will be prepared to present a responsible operating budget for the residents to consider at the annual town meeting. And before I give the stage back, I just want to, in particular, give thanks to some of the people that I've worked with so closely here in the last, I don't know, it seems like years, but I guess it's been weeks in preparation of this budget. Certainly, Carrie Coburn-Dion, the Assistant Town Manager, has been invaluable in terms of her knowledge of finance, being a former treasurer-collector herself. That's been very helpful to me with respect to her insights and guidance in preparing this document. Brian Perry, as previously noted, a real gem of a find. I'm glad the board saw fit to appoint him, and it's been a great pleasure working with him, and I've certainly relied upon his counsel. Also from his office, Beth Lallement, who is the Assistant Finance Director, was responsible for putting together a number of the documents that will be presented to the Board of Selectmen and the Finance Committee. And then certainly John O'Neill, he was the mastermind behind the PowerPoint presentation and is always a go-to guy for me. And then not to overlook the people in the office for their ongoing support in this marathon of an effort. So I thank you and turn it back to the chair.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Hull. I know that you have spent a lot of time yourself over the last weeks and months, including past several weekends, and I know that you fought through illness the last week or so, and I appreciate your efforts here in putting this together. And I also want to applaud your team, the ones that are here tonight and the ones that are not. We thank them very much. We thank our friends from the school department and the school committee that are here this evening, and the multiple department heads that are here as well. This is the first time that the Board of Selectmen has seen this presentation and the budget, and I know we all look forward to thoroughly vetting it, and this is the very beginning of what will be a very public process that we go through every year. As the manager mentioned, over the next 6 weeks or so, the Finance Committee will have something in the order of 10 to 12 meetings, all which will be open to the public for discussion and input. And I know that this board will certainly look forward to input from residents as well. Just a couple quick initial reactions from myself before we can hear from my colleagues is that once again, I'm very pleased to see the investment in our schools in this budget, particularly the investment in special education. I'm pleased to see the investment in dispatch upgrades, improvements to our infrastructure, including sidewalks, our investment in technology. I'm pleased to see our debt is declining, and we're also seeing a decrease in our fire department's overtime this year. I share everyone's trash concerns going forward. I think that'll be a major issue for us as we move forward. And I'm pleased to see that several major projects are being paid for out of free cash. And so I look forward to ongoing discussions with you and the FinCom as we go through this. Again, I thank you for your efforts, and I look forward to working through this process with you. At this time, I'd like to open it up to any of my colleagues who have comments or initial questions. Mr. McCoy.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the fact that you brought that up. This is the very first time we've had an opportunity to look at the budget, and I would like to reserve right at future meetings to obviously have more discussion. And I know the manager worked hard with his staff who do a wonderful job putting in the budget. And, you know, and I know it's a big task, him doing that, and I hope there's you got to agree to disagree on how we do different approaches. I'd just like to touch upon a few things if I could. Right now, we have $38 million in free cash, two accounts. I believe $22 million in free cash, and I think $16 million in the capital stabilization account. And it seems like last year, we made, above and beyond paying our bills, we were blessed to have $6 million more into our account. In the past 4 or 5 years, we were able to put, above and beyond paying our bills, we had about $4 million that we made in free cash over the past 4 or 5 years. So we're at $38 million, and I'm just trying to follow something here. And if we're lucky enough and blessed enough in the next fiscal year to make $6 million, in the next fiscal year to make $6 million, we would have the potential of looking at $50 million free cash in this community. And I'm looking at it in a couple of ways. And I know we're talking about paying for projects. I know it was stated in that town hall auditorium a couple months ago between you and Mr. Doherty saying, if we go forward, we're looking at a debt exclusion. And I know at the last meeting, you didn't realize that, how you would want to make those expenses. So I'm looking at everything, and I'm saying to myself, we may have the potential of $50 million. And you look at it, it's basically almost like overtaxation. We're looking at paying all the bills, things are going great in the town, and it's wonderful to have money in the bank. I mean, hey, I would like to make a great income and always make sure that I've got money in my account, and I get that, you know, so the way I look at it is, and I think the board did a great thing by taking a vote, was relative to the MSBA setting, like about the potential, maybe 6 new schools down the future, and it may take 5 to 6 years, even before we look at it. We may not even get a school, but I think the board did a great thing by doing that. So I'm taking a look at what we have in free cash, and I know the town manager acknowledges the fact that, you know, that the flavor out there may not be as favorable to like a senior center or fire substation relative to a town hall or a school administration building. And I think we do have more other priorities other than the town hall, respectfully, Mr. Manager and the superintendent, to the town hall or the school administration building. And I look at this, and I say to myself, you got to put priorities in life. We've been talking for years of a fire substation in North Wilmington. We have yet identified, I'm glad to hear you say tonight, Mr. Manager, and I think it's crucial for us to identify an area so we can actually start the project. And I know an individual as well as you, and we talked about it, that, like you stated, a private landowner may want to do something with the town and give property, which I think is a great location in North Wilmington. So we need to identify that. We take a look at going to the town meeting, spending, what, $955,000 on a feasibility study. You know, being on the board a long time, you have memory. And I remember us, when we were talking about building a brand-new library, we spent thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars on a feasibility study, but yet, when it came to the appropriation, the townspeople voted it down. So if we do a debt exclusion, not only the people at the town meeting are gonna weigh in on a vote, we need to go to the ballot box. So it's an uphill battle. All right, so, you know, and what I think is this, you know, if we're looking at a possibility, $50 million in 2 years from now, I believe that we need to do a jump start now. I think that if we was to take $8 million out of free cash and build a fire substation in North Wilmington, take $8 million in that vicinity to build and create a brand-new senior center that we need. And the other thing is, by the time we actually, if we're blessed enough for the MSBA to even come back, we're talking 5, 6 years from now, providing that the folks will foot the bill in this community, because there is no magic credit card. It may take 5 to 6 years before we can build a school. Why don't we take $8 million out of free cash and distribute it within the school systems with roofing, windows, and HVAC? I mean, it's gonna take us a half a dozen years before we even look at a possibility of a construction of a new school. So, you know, and I know I'm saying a little bit right here now, Mr. Chairman, but you take a look at that. We're blessed to have all this money as free cash. We need to utilize that now. I don't see what the advantage is, us having $50 million on the way we're going in 2 years from now. And I understand the Department of Revenue wants to make sure we have at least 15%, you know, for free cash when it comes to our budget. We're looking at, what, $18 million. If we put 6 million, 6 million in the next 2 years, okay, and we spend $24 million in free cash to do these projects, we're gonna be back to $30 million, above and beyond 15%, without raising one tax dollar. And I know we can all give a nice talk, and I get that. But, you know, I'd be opposed to any 2.5 override, any debt exclusion. We have the money, we need to do it. And I say it once again, that, you know, relative to these feasibility studies, we should have everything under one umbrella. We can do an intelligent plan, go to the folks for X amount of dollars, you know, we can break it down, 8.3 million, 8 million, you know, in the article it would state, you know, for construction, you know, architect, engineering, site work, to actually let the folks know what they're voting for and how much. Because I'd hate to see us go to town meeting this year, $1.6 million, and the folks don't vote to appropriate it, you know, and then, or they do a vote to appropriate it, and then there's not the funding to do a project. I think the town hall, I think the senior center would go, but the town hall, Mr. Manager, respectfully, I just think we have more priorities. And you talk about quality of our kids, you know, we just can't wait 5, 6 years for the MSBA to come back to us. We need to do something now. And I firmly believe that. Take those funds and do something, at least, you know, roofing, windows, HVAC. Those are the most crucial things you want in your home. And that's how I think that's how we should go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know I spoke a few minutes, and that's how I feel.
I certainly appreciate the opinion. The one thing I would take exception to once again, and I'm not sure where this is coming from, but this insistence that I'm talking about a debt exclusion. I have never, in the presentations that I've made in this lead up to this budget, talked about a debt exclusion. I'm not sure what the motive is in suggesting that I'm pursuing a debt exclusion, but that is absolutely not the case, and I will not, it's just not true. It's just not true.
Thank you. Mr. Eaton?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I will start, Mr. Hull, by saying that your analogy of a growing family needing to replace an older model Ford Escape strikes close to home, as my growing family and my 10-year-old Ford Escape is parked just outside the doors. So I didn't expect to have to buy a new car when I came here tonight, but that being said, I will touch upon some of the comments made already, but I don't think that seeing $50 million in free cash or combined free cash and capital stabilization is going to happen anytime soon. I will note, and I will thank you and your team for putting together the capital improvement plan book that looks out 5 years, and I will note that the construction of a new senior center is in the very next year's plan. So certainly I don't think that we are just putting money away in capital and free cash and capital stabilization with no plan to spend it to invest in our infrastructure. I think the fact that it is there does provide us some flexibility to go about investing and improving our infrastructure in a responsible way that minimizes the impact of the taxpayer, because as with every resident in town, I'm sure everyone up here is not thrilled whenever we get our quarterly property tax statements. I will point out that the addition of 8 additional firefighters at last year's annual town meeting has resulted in a decrease in the personnel services in the fire department for your projected fiscal '21 budget, with an overtime reduction of $400,000 itself, a reduction in just the overall firefighter pay as well. That's not to say that our firefighters are getting paid less per, but the reduction in personnel services from just over $5 million to just under 4.5, I think, is a very good step in the right direction, and hopefully Chief Kavanaugh, or soon-to-be Chief Kavanaugh, the addition of new staffing will provide some relief to a lot of the firefighters that have been working very, very long hours, and I do believe that the more hours your individuals are working, the more likely they are to get injured, and that's not only a budget concern, but more importantly, it's a concern to the individuals that are getting injured. I will point out, where are we here? So, on the, I am glad to see, again, Mr. Hull, that you are investing, or your proposed budget has $1.5 million to prepay retirement, and another million towards OPEB as we seek to chip away at those significant liabilities and still try and plan for investing in the aforementioned facilities issues. And I'm glad to see that I think certainly the consensus of the school committee and probably the community at large that we need to perhaps reconsider the initial plan for how the elementary schools are going to be addressed, and that we're not just going to try and wait and figure it out on our own, but we're going to be proactive and have the school department, give the school department a little bit of help in organizing how that will undergo, I think, a better solution for our students and families. I will note that I think I'm not right now enamored with the idea of a new town hall school administration building in the next year, so we're talking fiscal '21 right now and the fiscal '22. I think that we might not need to go that quickly, but that being said, I do understand that there is very much a need for planning, just with the Wildwood. A lot of the discussion that seems to go on focuses on the students and teachers that are there and planning to put them in a building that is more appropriate, or I guess an improvement, I'll say, to the current situation. But there is a significant portion of the school department central administrative staff, the student support services that are at the Wildwood School, where if we come up with a solution to where the students and teachers are going to go, we still have 15 or so staff members that are already not with the remainder of the central administrative staff in the Roman House, which is not an appropriate location or structure for what there is. But they're not even, that structure is not even capable of meeting the capacity of the central administrative staff. So while a lot of the discussion around town centers on the town hall is not in bad of a shape as the Wildwood or something along those lines, the MSBA will not reimburse for workspace for central administrative staff. So once we find out a solution to where these students and teachers at the Wildwood School are going to go, we are still going to have to figure out what the plan is for the central administrative staff that are there as well, because they can't go to the Roman House, and we're going to have to figure out where that goes. I do think that combining eventually the school administration and the town hall does make sense. I am perhaps a little bit cool on how quickly that happens, but I do recognize that the MSBA process does take some time. And while this board has been, I think, very supportive of the school committee in trying to expedite a solution to the elementary schools facilities in town, I do think that it does make sense to invest free cash towards planning for what the next step is for the school department, central administrative staff, as well as the town hall. I think that's most of my comments. Again, as has been said, this is the first time that we have seen this, but I am glad. My initial thoughts are this is a good budget. I'm looking forward to seeing the Finance Committee meetings, and I will note that for the first time, good friends at WCTV will be televising Finance Committee meetings as well, and they continue to be a very important partner with the town to always improve on government transparency. So I think that's it for me.
Mr. Chair, if I could just make
Please.
one point, and that is just I want to be very clear. Your comment about the reduction in fire salaries. So it shows within the appropriation amount, a reduction in fire salaries. That is in large measure because of quite frankly, the good work of Deputy Chief Bill Kavanaugh in ascertaining obtaining the SAFER grant. So what is happening is that we're using some of the money from the SAFER grant to offset the costs of those new personnel, and that's being done in a way that we're not going to be shocked by all of those costs at once. So just I want to make it very clear that we're not seeing in actuality, a reduction in the cost of fire salaries. It's just that some of the costs are being paid for through that grant.
Thank you. And, Mr. Eaton, thank you. You continue to impress me. We've had the budget for 45 minutes, and I'm feverishly scribbling over here. You've got it color-coded with tabs already, so impressive.
This is my Super Bowl, man.
No question about it.
God help us.
Mrs.
Thank
O'Mahony?
you, thank you. This did make me feel very inadequate watching that all go down because I don't have sticky notes. Jeff, thank you for putting this together. Thank you to your department heads for meeting with you to put this together in a thoughtful way. I think you definitely have addressed the concerns and the needs of our town in a thoughtful way. I just want to I guess I have a question that I hope clarifies something that struck me, that you're asking as part of the budget for $200,000 to have someone engage, have a firm engage in assessing the school needs, facilities-wise, for expansion, renovation, or new construction. Is that correct, that $200,000?
Yes, it's actually a two-part effort. The consultant would work with the school committee and the town to, and actually, some of the information, much of the information they can take from the Cecil report that was done previously, because they did a lot of work on assessing the condition of the buildings, but taking it to the next level to begin to identify different, a preferred approach to how to deal with the elementary schools going forward. You know, as I indicate, the best way I can describe it, it's like a Rubik's Cube. There's so many different permutations in terms of whether you have a reduction in the transitions. I'm certainly not an education expert, but having folks who have been through this before, I think would be helpful in conjunction with the school department, the school committee, and others to facilitate that process. And then separately from that, at the same time, look at the Wildwood School and have the discussions about what can we do in a more immediate term to address that situation.
Great, because when you were giving your presentation, you said how Joanne Benton had referenced potentially mothballing the Boutwell and the Wildwood, and I wanted to make sure that that was clear, that the consolidation plan might be a factor, and I'm certainly not the person, or we're not necessarily the board to make that decision. I would want to hear from the school committee, from Dr. Brand, and from, a firm like this that could say this is what's going to make the most sense long-term, because I would hate to see, like using the analogy of, an addition on your home or upgrading your car, you don't want to go through all that effort and then realize that it was money wasted. I don't want to put a new roof on something that's going to be part of a pile of rubble in 10 years because it was determined that that was the building that needed to come down. Not that I think we would do that necessarily, but I like the idea that there's hopefully going to be a thoughtful plan put into place in this next year that will help shine a light on what the plan should be for the schools, because they are aged. The Wildwood has the most immediate need. I think we all agree that that needs to be addressed as soon as possible. But the other schools are older schools as well. And I think with the transitions being what they are for our students, they deserve the opportunity to explore alternatives to that. So I appreciate that that's in here. I'm glad to see that. I echo what Mr. McCoy and Mr. Eaton touched upon. I understand the planning purposes of the Town Hall School Administration Building. I'm glad to know, that's another thing I wanted to kind of clarify, that you including the feasibility study for that in the budget just means that that's going to be part of the town meeting articles. So it's given the same opportunity. That feasibility study isn't given any type of preferential treatment over the senior center feasibility study or any of the discussions we've had on that. So it's ultimately going to be up to the town to attend to determine if they want that to go forward next year or if they want to wait. That's not up to us. That's not anyone trying to backdoor a feasibility study as part of the budget. It's going to be given the same consideration by the attendees at the town meeting. So I personally believe I would like to know the school plan first, because I think that's going to tell us what facilities might be available in the future for such projects, for projects that might be able to be not necessarily put in the back of the house, but maybe number 3 or 4 on the list instead of number 1 or 2 on the list. But ultimately, I would hope the town will show up and tell us, you know, what they're thinking and what they want to see as well. The only other thing I had as kind of an initial reaction to all this information is, I know you did a great job showing us the tax rate comparisons with our surrounding towns, and I'm happy to see the residential falls kind of right in the middle, as you would hope it would. We're not the highest, we're not the lowest, but I am concerned with the commercial being the highest. And I know, you know, we're lucky that we're attracting businesses, but I guess through the chair, you know, I'd like to maybe suggest, since we have the chair of the Economic Development Committee in the audience, you know, I would really be interested to know if that tax rate is impacting our ability to attract businesses into town. Because if it is, then I think that's something we need to consider going forward on how we want to address that, because we don't want that to be the reason that we might be losing smaller businesses. If that's a consideration. I'm not saying it definitely is. I'm just saying, seeing it as the highest tax rate for the 8 surrounding communities is, you know, concerning to me, that might be a detractor for a smaller business that's looking for a new place to locate. But overall, I'm excited, and again, echoing Mr. Eaton, I'm happy that WCTV is covering it. I am going to try to get in person to the meetings, but I know there's a few that I have conflicts, and to be able to watch it at home and hear what's going on still is definitely a huge value add that they're giving us. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Carver?
Yeah, Mr. Chair. Mr. Howell, thank you, and to your department heads for putting together this fine report. I appreciate your continued conservative approach to the budget. I'd like to recognize the fact that you are addressing the unfunded liabilities for retirement and OPEB, which is very important. That $2.5 million that you're appropriating is all from free cash, I'm assuming, or?
The 1 point, that is actually from the levy.
1.5 and then 1 million.
That is not from free cash.
It is not?
No.
Okay. And is any of it from free cash?
Not on the only amount coming from free cash is the 2 million that's going to the capital stabilization. The 1.5 and the other amount is coming from the levy.
And I want to recognize the fact that you're increasing the hours at the elder services. The need over there seems to warrant that increase. I would like to recognize the improvements that you're making, as Chairman Bendel did, to the West Intermediate School, and addressing the Wildwood Cemetery, which I think is very important in its expansion, and the infrastructure that we need in the communications and with the police and the fire. I also, as my colleagues had mentioned, the importance of addressing the facilities master plan. And I do agree with you. I believe we need a town hall, a school administration building, and a senior center. I think, as you mentioned, as a Rubik's Cube, those two are very important in addressing the school issue. I appreciate the fact that you're putting $200,000 to hire a firm to develop a real plan for the schools. You know, you look at what's most needed out there, what's going to last 5 years, or what's going to last 3 years. Certainly, the Roman House and the Wildwood School are not going to last over the next 3 to 5 years. I don't think. And that's why it's important what you're putting together to address those issues. And if that means that, you know, a new town hall and school administration is built to free up the Glen Road in order to have this become a school where the Wildwood kids would come here. In the meantime, for us to look at building a new school or consolidating schools, it's all a moving part. And I appreciate the fact that you're addressing those issues for us. That's it. I look forward to going through the process, attending the FinCom meetings, and looking at this a little more closely. As my colleagues have said, this is our first time seeing it. And once again, thank you for your efforts in putting this all together.
And so, as we mentioned, this will be the very beginning of what's a very public process. We recognize that $120 million is a lot of money. Put things in perspective, we heard from the governor last Tuesday that the proposed governor's budget for the state is somewhere in the order of $44 billion. So we certainly recognize it's a lot of money. And so we look forward to residents and all the boards and committees combing through this with great detail. But again, we appreciate your, if you will, state of the town address here on what's going on. Obviously, you can see that facilities will be a huge theme in this year's budget. And one thing that I failed to mention earlier is that in my conversations with the manager, which seem to be daily at this point, not once do we not talk about a fire substation. I think we talk about that every single day, you and I, and ways we can do that at this point today. That's not a possibility. And I've stated multiple times publicly that that's my #1 priority. But that doesn't mean because it's not an option that I'm going to take my ball and go home. I like the idea of the fact that we can address some other issues just because my #1 priority is not being addressed at the moment. Hopefully it will. But we can still take a look at some other of these projects that need to be addressed and that we can chip away a little bit at each one. And I really appreciate the work that's being done in conjunction with the school department to think of creative ideas to speed up that process to eventually hopefully get some MSBA reimbursement. And so I applaud the idea of the $200,000. I think the MSBA would be really appealed of the idea of us doing that. And so I thank you for that. And I look forward to hearing more about it in the coming days. Mr. McCoy.
Yeah, just one question through you, Mr. Chairman, to the town manager. Jeff, I realize, and I think everybody realizes in this room, about 3.5 months from now, we're going to be at the town meeting. And I think a fair question, and I think you know that question's going to come. If I'm a citizen and I say, Mr. Manager, I'm willing to support the $955,000 feasibility study for a town hall school administration building, could you please tell me how we're going to pay for that? And Jeff, even sooner than that, because you're our chief fiscal officer, it's going to get asked, I would assume, at the FinCom. And, I don't know if, that question's going to come up probably in another 45 days. And how do you respond to that?
We will look at the options. Borrowing is certainly going to be a major element of it, whether we will be able to use some funds from the capital stabilization to reduce the cost or to offset some of the costs. I think it's one of the questions is how expensive is a town school admin building going to be? I mean, those are all open questions, and it's hard to forecast what the financing plan is going to be until we know what the cost of the project is going to be.
All right, I appreciate that, Jeff. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And so, as it was mentioned, all of this will be discussed in the coming weeks, and it will culminate with our town meeting on May 2nd. So that's the best part about having an open town meeting form of government. If you don't like something, you can vote it down. So we encourage everybody to come to town meeting, come to the FinCom meetings, come to the Selectmen meetings, reach out to the management staff, reach out to your representatives, have conversations, engage in dialogue. We welcome your feedback as we go forward. And once again, thank you, Mr. Manager, for your proposed budget here this evening.
You're welcome.
Okay. We will move, we have no communications. We'll move to our 4 board to consider items this evening.
The first item under board to consider is the ratification of my appointment of Paul Shalafor as a member of the Historical Commission. So the one of the members of the commission, Kathleen Delaney, is resigned, and her term continues through 2020. Mr. Shalafor has expressed an interest in serving in that post, and I'm seeking the board's ratification.
Okay. Would anybody like to offer a motion?
So moved as described by the town manager.
I'll second it.
Motion's made and second. Is there any discussion?
Just want to say, I think I'm glad to have him back on that role. I think it's a great way to kick off his retirement, and I know he's going to do great work on it.
It's a nice book, too.
Absolutely. Any further discussion? Thanks to Mrs. Delaney for her service. All those in favor? It's unanimous. Thank you to Mr. Shalfer for his willingness to volunteer.
Excuse me.
I'll give you a minute. The second board to consider here is a request from the Wilmington High School football team to conduct a fundraising car wash at the town common parking lot on Sunday, September 13th, 2020, 9 a.m. to 12 p.m. Does anybody like to offer a motion?
Make that motion.
Thank you.
I'll second it.
Motion's been made and seconded. Thank you. Is there any discussion? Best of luck to the team in their fundraising efforts. All those in favor? It is unanimous. All right.
Next under board to consider is the inhabitant bylaw study committee's recommendations.
Okay, so we want to start by thanking the members of the bylaw committee who have volunteered their time over the last several months, taking a look at all of our bylaws, specifically around the area of town meeting and ways we can improve it. I want to point them all out, if I may, and thank them publicly. Chief Joe Desmond, who's here this evening, Dan Ardito, Selectman Mike McCoy, Francis Oliveri, Robert G. Peterson Jr., John Romano, Gary DePalma is also here this evening, Al Rigo, and of course, our town clerk, Christina Tuma Conway. So thank you to those volunteers who worked diligently, to put together several recommendations for us. We have a total of 9 this evening that we'll take up individually, if that's okay with the board. We'll describe them to you. I believe we've all had an opportunity to review them at this point, and we will vote on them individually, if that's okay. Yeah, if voted, if passed here this evening, they will move forward as their own individual article at this coming town meeting. So anything that is passed here tonight will be placed on this coming warrant, will be voted on at town meeting, and if approved at town meeting in May, would take effect for the following town meeting. Okay? And so we'll start off with recommendation number 1.
So the first recommendation, inhabitant bylaw, chapter 2, section 1, annual town election. The bylaw review committee recommends amending chapter 2, section 1 to change the date of the annual town election to the last Saturday in April.
Okay? Would anybody like to offer a motion?
I'll make that as a motion.
I'll second it.
Okay, the motion has been made and seconded. Is there any discussion on the recommendation to the date change to the annual town election?
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
I think that we should look at it in its entirety, because under section 2A, it's stating that then the town meeting would be held before the election, rather than traditionally after the election. I think if it's, the impression that I got was that our board members did not want to have a town meeting before the election because it could cause some political issues. So if that's the case, that was the impression that I got. Having this the last Saturday in April may cause a problem with Section A. If it's the intent of the committee to not have a town meeting the first weekend in May because of First Holy Communions and that, issues, then we should look at going back to the way it was with the election on the third Saturday and the town meeting on the fourth Saturday in April. But that's how it used to be. And I think it was changed probably because of school vacation. But I don't think that school vacation is an issue anymore because there are various ways that people can vote. They can come directly to town hall and vote over the counter. We've always had the absentee ballots, you know, so I just think that making this the last Saturday may cause a problem. I don't know how you want to proceed, but I think we need to look at the whole picture here.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point, that obviously this recommendation is based upon number 2,
Correct.
which could bound us to approving number 2A and B.
Right.
Any further thoughts on that?
I have no problem taking all the recommendations up together, since they were presented to us together, if that's what the chair wants to do.
Yeah, my fear is that if we present, and that I did consider that, and we certainly can consider that. My fear is that if somebody likes 2 or 3 things that have been proposed, but doesn't like the others, that it completely gets voted down at town meeting, and we didn't get anything out of it, right? So I fear, put it all together, we may not get anything. You know, this case, you might get some improvements, you may get everything, who knows? But I want to make sure I want to make sure we give the opportunity to residents to filter through this and vote for the things they want to and vote against things they may not like.
Mr. Chair, is it my understanding from board members that the first weekend in May is not convenient? It's not good to have it because of First Holy Communion, because of sports. That may happen, because sports will happen in April as well. If so, then I'd make an amendment that we would have the election the weekend before town meeting, with the town meeting the last Saturday in April, because there could be 5 Saturdays in April. So the last Saturday in April would be the town meeting, and the Saturday before would be the election. It just moves it out of that first weekend in May, if that's why we're taking this up.
We have a proposed amendment to the motion. Any-
I just inquire, I'm
Please do.
sorry, but, I mean, I'll second it for discussion purposes, but
Okay.
ultimately, we have 2 members of the committee here. I just want to make sure, because I do understand where Mr. Kyra is coming from, that one of the concerns with moving it to before the town election is that it could be an opportunity for campaigning purposes, which wouldn't be appropriate during town meeting. But I also believe that's what the role of the moderator would be, to make sure that that type of behavior didn't occur at town meeting. So I guess my concern is if this committee proposed changes that, because they felt, people, like one of the things that I heard, the reason to move it would be is because the Board of Selectmen, who have been on the board for the past year, it would give them the opportunity to participate in town meeting no matter what happened at the election a week later. So something they had been working on for the past year, they would have the ability to sit as a Board of Selectmen member, to participate in that town meeting as a Board of Selectmen member before the next election would occur. So I kind of get both pros and cons to both, and I guess I just want to make sure, did the committee purposefully move it for that reason, or were they just trying to figure out a way to fit both of those meetings in prior to kind of the busy spring season occurring?
Mr. McCoy.
Could I just, could
Excuse me, recognizing Mr. McCoy.
I just make something, just a comment? I mean, let's talk about for a moment, like, if people think somebody's gonna be politically grandstanding, don't forget, we got a good town moderator. If he thought that, he would rule them out of order, and he's done that in the past. So I think that kind of eliminates that theory. But, and I understand the concern of, everybody up here. I agree with you, Mr. Chairman, unless I misunderstood, that I think all these recommendations should be accepted, put it on the town meeting floor, and let it be debated. Let the townspeople decide, if they want to accept that. I hear what Mr. Kyra is saying. I would have loved to have, like sometime in early April, an election maybe the first Saturday in April and town meeting the second week. We're trying to accommodate, like you said, the sports and Holy Communion. And the way we're looking at it is it gives the flexibility of the Board of Selectmen to adjust the election to work around that. I know it's not perfect, but I think we worked hard. I think we put together something good, and I think if you let nature take its course, let the townspeople decide what they want. And if they don't like it, then let them speak. I mean, the whole idea is trying to drum up support to get folks at the town meeting. That's the goal. Thank you.
Point of order.
So what's your point of
Chairman, with regard to the election.
Excuse me, name and address, please.
Kevin McDonald, 140 Andover Street. With regard to the election and the town meeting, there is an article at town meeting that calls for a vote to receive the members who were elected into office. And if the bylaw committee is looking to have the election after the town meeting, that may present a problem.
Noted. Okay, we have an amendment that's been offered by Mr. Kyra. It's been seconded by Mrs. O'Mahony. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? Mr. Kyra, do you mind repeating it one more time for the membership?
Sure, that the election, that the town meeting will be held on the last Saturday in April, and that the election will be held on the Saturday before town meeting. So the last Saturday could be the 4th or 5th Saturday, and the election would be either the 3rd or 4th, so that's why I'm vague in putting a specific, that's why I'm saying last Saturday. And
Okay.
preceding that would be the election.
Any further discussion on the amendment? Seeing none, okay. All those in favor of the amendment proposed by Mr. Kyra, signify by saying aye. 4, all opposed? 1. The amendment passes. Okay, now we're back to the amended motion. Is there any further discussion about the now amended motion?
Mr. Chair, are we gonna be taking them individually now?
If that's the pleasure of the board, so now, we're still on number 1.
Okay.
Yep. Is there any, unless you want to take them up all at once? Does anybody,
I'd make a motion, that we accept the recommendation of the bylaw committee and put it to the town meeting full and let the folks decide what they want to do.
Mr. Chair, the bylaw committee did yeoman's work to give it to the selectmen for their recommendation on what they did. So that's, I believe, what we're doing here tonight. I believe that's what
so Mr.
what they
McCoy,
were instructed to do.
if you're okay with it, we still have a motion
Sure,
from Mr.
absolutely.
Eaton that's been amended.
Right.
Are you willing to withdraw that?
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay.
Okay. You would call for it. Thank you. No problem. Withdraw it.
Okay. So, all those in favor of the amended motion for recommendation number 1? All opposed? 4 to 1. And recommendation number 1 will be placed on the warrant.
And again, I'm sorry, for clarification purposes, Mr. Chair, it will say that the annual town meeting will be held, the annual town election will be the second to last Saturday of April? Is that effectively?
Correct.
Okay.
The town meeting will be the last Saturday, the election will be preceding Saturday.
So then 2A would be amended, so that's what we'd be voting on next, is
Correct.
2A
Now
would be
we're
the
on to
last.
2, which is,
I would think 2A would be moved at this point.
Okay.
So we would,
2B is obviously very
right,
important.
so 2A would be out by virtue of the vote that was just taken under 1.
I believe you're correct.
Well, no, because we still need to say when the annual town meeting would be.
The annual town meeting will be the last Saturday in April.
So that's number 1 is now both of those dates.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. So second to last Saturday's election, last Saturday
Town
is
meeting.
town meeting.
Point of order. I believe the town charter dictates when the town meeting has to be.
Thank you. I believe the
That's what
inhabitant
we're working
bylaw
on.
committee is aware of that. Okay, 2B, where we're discussing the time change. Anybody want to offer a motion to adopt the recommendation of the time change?
I'd make a motion to recommend adopting the time change.
Motion's been made, is there a second?
I'll second it.
Second. Any discussion on the time change?
Yeah, 9 o'clock may be a little too early. I mean, I get up early, but I don't know, you know, an hour either way, a half hour either way. I'll go with what the body wants, but I just think 9 o'clock may be a little early for some of the residents, but.
Any other discussion on the time? All those in favor? It's unanimous. Inhabitant bylaw recommendation number 3.
So, inhabitant bylaw, chapter 2, section 10A, order of articles for annual town meeting. No change in the order of articles for the annual town meeting is recommended by the bylaw review committee. However, the committee does recommend the Board of Selectmen, in conjunction with the town manager, town moderator, and town council, consider changing its presentation of the town operating budget to include an overall omnibus budget presentation by the town manager, followed by the taking up of the operating budget as a whole in lieu of dividing it into smaller portions.
Is there a motion?
I'll make that motion.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion's been made in second. Is there any discussion?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I
Skylar?
would be opposed to this. I believe by doing this, it's going to limit the residents' ability to speak on the budget issues as it's broken out. I mean, if you have a mechanism in place now that's not broken, so why try to fix it? As that old adage goes, we're trying to be more transparent, and I think that doing this and taking up as a whole is not going to allow the residents the opportunity to speak on each of the items that are presented in the budget. I just don't agree with this proposal.
Is there any other discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor of the recommendation number 3? All opposed? Passes 4-1. Recommendation number 4.
Recommendation number 4, inhabitant bylaw, chapter 2, section 10B, order of articles for town meeting, random selection. The bylaw review committee recommends amending chapter 2, section 10B to eliminate the random selection of certain articles and to set the order of the articles that would have previously been randomly selected as follows: the town-sponsored articles and then petitioned articles.
Okay, is there a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to make a second, but if I could through you, Mr. Chairman, I'd give any of my time to, I see Mr. De Palma wanted to have a little input. I'd yield any of my time if Mr. De Palma wanted to make a comment, because he did serve on the bylaw committee, and that's through you, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
Whatever you say.
Gentleman yields his time to the gentleman from Swain Road.
On your first vote, isn't that Easter weekend?
Well, I know the calendar's different every year. I don't have it in front of me.
We've had it on Easter weekend.
I
Easter
believe
is a
it.
Sunday, not a Saturday. So we've already voted, Mr. Chair, on that issue.
Thank you, Mr. Carter.
Yeah, I think it's a valid point, Mr. De Palma. I can't answer the question directly. I don't know off the top of my head which day is Easter. I know it fluctuates, so it will be different, but certainly that'll be something that has to be taken into consideration. I should note that all the recommendations and the votes here tonight are just to put it onto the warrant. Obviously, this is not an endorsement of, well, maybe it is, but it's up to the membership how they want to vote come town meeting.
Mr. Chair, it looks like it's April 12th in 2020. And
Easter?
the Roman Catholic Easter is April 12th,
Thank you.
2020. The Greek Orthodox would be April 19th.
This would be first effective in 2021 if it were to be adopted at town meeting.
It's April 4th, 2021.
April 4th.
April 17th, 2022, and the calendar doesn't go out any further than that I Googled.
So it doesn't affect.
For the next few years anyway, it wouldn't affect.
But it could theoretically, and so,
It can now. It can affect it theoretically now.
Yep.
So.
yeah, it's something to consider, no question.
Yeah.
Yep, you're right.
Okay, we're back to number 4. Of the order of articles for town meeting, the recommendation for random selection. We have a motion. It's been seconded by Mr. McCoy. Is there any further discussion?
I would be opposed to to getting rid of random selection. I think we should continue to keep random selection so that we're not, if we go in an order, 1 to 26, then we're talking about people are going to, as they refer to as stack the deck, because they're going to know when something is coming up. Random order was put in there to eliminate that type of politicizing the articles. So I think a random order is appropriate to keep it that way. And I know the argument is, oh, well, they'll just use their text and they'll use their social media. Well, it's a lot easier to get people there if they know that it's coming in order. If all of a sudden you're taking Article 5 as your first and then Article 30 as your second, and someone needs people there for Article 30 and they start to do their texting to get people from Shawshene soccer field or from wherever, by the time they get there, that article's going to be probably done and over with. But having it done sequentially, then they're just they'll make a call, hey, the article's coming up, we're on Article 28, it's coming up pretty soon, and then they'll all be there. So I think it's important to keep a random order instead of going 1, 2, 3, 4.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to disagree with my colleague. I mean, I've been around a long time, and if an article comes up, and I mean, I won't be specific with certain individuals, they got that baby on speed dial, and within minutes, 100 people show up in that room. And I'll tell you something, from sitting from up there and looking out to that audience, the town moderator always has to say, when that article is already read and the vote's taken, what do people do? They leave the room, and he always says, ladies and gentlemen in the audience, could you please take it easy and quiet it down, because we still got business. It happens every single time. So the deck is stacked against folks already the way it is. And I understand what you're saying, but, you know, you try it. If it doesn't work, you go back to another year. That's all.
Okay, Mr. Eaton.
Yeah, briefly, Mr. Chair. So I do think that technology has certainly reduced some of the effect of, I mean, back, it wasn't too long ago, people would run to the payphone and they would have a phone chain set up, and now one person can have 100 other folks' numbers put into an app, and they can send one text message and it goes to all of them, and all of a sudden they show up. And while that's happening, you can get up and have a couple people just speak in the article to drag it out, so by the time a couple people have spoken, the folks from across town have come in. I think what we should be wanting to do and striving to do is make it easier for people to vote. That doesn't mean that people have to vote on every article. That means that people could vote on the articles that they want to, because I think no matter what we do, none of the proposed changes here is going to significantly change the duration of town meeting, which I think is a significant obstacle for a lot of people. Because whether if it's in late April or early May, usually you're talking about one of the first good Saturdays in the entire year where people are getting out, they're fixing up the yard, ready for Memorial Day weekend. And if someone doesn't want to wait because there's one article that they care about, and they don't want to wait from 10:30 or 9 o'clock in the morning until 4, 5, 6 o'clock at night for that one article they had pulled, I don't think we should be having or encouraging a system that makes that person wait 8 hours to be doing that. So voting is a right, it's not an obligation. I think we want to be, if they want to stay for all of it, and I know that myself and my colleagues up here, we love that stuff, and there's plenty of folks in town that will go no matter what. But I think we should be mindful of the fact that if we're trying to increase participation, we should recognize that not everybody in town wants to dedicate an entire Saturday to sitting through town meetings. So make it easier for them to access direct democracy and vote on the article that they want, even if that's the only one. So if it's several ones and spread out over a couple, then maybe they're staying longer than they want to, but at the same time, I think we should be trying to reduce barriers towards attendance and participation. And I think that this does take a step in the right direction.
Any further discussion? Okay, seeing none, we'll call for the vote. All in favor? All opposed? Motion passes 4-1. Recommendation number 5.
Recommendation number 5, Inhabitant Bylaw, Chapter 2, Section 19, quorum. The Bylaw Review Committee recommends repealing Section 19 in its entirety, thereby eliminating the quorum requirement.
Okay, is there a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Motion's made, is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? I'll start if I may. I stand opposed to this simply for the fact that I sit in this seat. If I didn't sit in this seat, perhaps my opinion would be different, but as Mr. Eaton mentioned, regardless of when or how long or where town meeting is, I think there's a few of us, myself included, who will be there for the entirety. Be embarrassed to say that perhaps we even look forward to it, but I would be hesitant to have 10 and 12, whatever the small number is, people move forward, especially when the budget is so early on in the process. Usually Article number 5, if I'm not mistaken, that perhaps folks could miss it. So I have concerns about this one myself, but certainly I'm open to.
Yeah. So, Mr. Chair, I made the motion. I think the Bylaws Committee thought this through. I'm sure they had multiple discussions on this. And quite frankly, I'm curious to see how many people show up to vote on this. I think these recommendations were presented to us. I think that they were thoughtfully put together.
No question.
And I can't get the town moderator's quote out of my head when he concluded the last town meeting, saying we just approved a $120 million budget in an empty auditorium. So I think the reality is we have quorum to start a meeting, and we don't have quorum for the rest of town meeting as it is now. So I'm curious to see how many people show up to weigh in on this, because I think it's really up to the town at this point to decide if they're comfortable with the idea of 20 people in town coming to town meeting and approving $120+ million, $140 million plus budget. I don't think it's up to us at this point. I think we want the town's voice to be heard. That's why we have this public town meeting instead of an elected town meeting. And I think this is the amendment that's going to make or break what town meeting looks like going forward. Because if people really care and people really want their voices to be heard, they're going to show up and vote one way or the other on this. They might decide we need quorum still, and at least they'll show up to vote that way for the 2020 town meeting. But I'm curious to see how this one plays out, and I want to give it a chance.
So,
I just say, I totally agree with Selectman O'Mahony. I mean, that was the whole feel of the committee, take exactly what you just stated, and that's how we was looking at it.
further discussion? Mr. Eaton?
Yeah, so and perhaps, Mr. Chair, if it's appropriate, we could get Mr. DePalma or Chief Desmond to elaborate on some of this, but I'm very hesitant about this. I know in my conversations with Mr. Hull in the past, he's mentioned that issues are probably the largest driver of attendance at town meetings. I know if we're voting on a new high school, we have a packed auditorium that's bursting at the seams in an overflow room. And if in other years there's not that big ticket item that residents are circling the date of town meeting on their calendar to go. And I know we asked Mr. Romano when he was here, and he's a member of the Bylaw Review Committee, when he was here a few weeks ago about this specific issue, and I think his comment was, and I hope I'm not misstating him, was that it actually has tended to, in other communities, increase attendance because folks are worried about what would happen if only a few people show up, so it actually drives attendance. And while that might help with the fact that more people are showing up, I think it does it for really the wrong reason. That people are showing up because they're afraid that their government is going to do some sort of crazy activity if they don't show up and prevent that from happening. Certainly, the way that our bylaws are structured, it puts, I think rightfully so, the right to make big decisions on the residents that live in town. And I don't want to, I think with the changes that we are recommending to be included on the warrant for this year's town meeting, as we're about halfway through their recommendations at this point, I think we have a good, for some of these, and some of these don't necessarily relate to attendance, but I think we are recommending enough changes to drive attendance right now that we should be able to get a good sample size over the next few years, where there will be some years that the issues on the warrant are particularly interesting and judging the effectiveness of our changes is going to be difficult, and other years where there might not be any of those big-ticket items that are going to drive folks there, but that actually might be the better litmus test for how effective these changes might be. So with the changes to the dates, to the start time, I'm comfortable at this point, but I'm very hesitant to send a message that if one person shows up to town meeting, they're making all the decisions for town. I'd rather we make sure that there's some floor for participation for residents that show up to make decisions as well. I recognize that we don't normally start at the scheduled start time at 10:30, and maybe if we're moving back to 10, that I don't expect will change, but at the same time, I want to make sure that the decisions that are being made for the town, the budget and otherwise, are being made by a good cross-section of the people that are in town, rather than just, well, it's 10:30 and there are 7 people in the auditorium, so let's get started.
I think, Mr. Eaton, you yield some time if the chief or Mr.
If I have any left, yeah.
Yes, you'd have a small balance.
The issue we were dealing with is the practice of a quorum and, the theory of one. I think the past 2 years, both the fire and police department had to call their working employees who live in town down just to make a quorum. Now, obviously, once that happens, they have to get back to work. So I think that shows the actual practice of a quorum doesn't really work. It's a snapshot in time, you get the right number, and then you move on. So we just thought, at this point, it may be best to spark interest by just, trying something else, where you can, and plus the delay, it's usually only, 20, 30 minutes, but there is a delay to start town meeting because you can't get that quorum. So that was just our rationale.
Mr. De Palma?
We also looked into a few of the towns in Tewksbury. They went to a no quorum, and they're getting more people now to their meetings than they did when they had the quorums. And for the same reason too, people will rush in, you call your police, fire, all your employees in, have them sign in, out the door they go, and you're still sitting there with 15, 20 people. And then when in Tewksbury, they found that more and more people started to show because they were concerned that a small handful of people were gonna control the town. And now they're getting more people. And that's one of the ideas that we went with also.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Okay. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor of recommendation number 5? All opposed? Motion fails. Recommendation number 6.
6, Inhabitant Bylaw, Chapter 3, Section 6, Town Council Opinions. The Bylaw Review Committee recommends that the portion of Chapter 3, Section 6 relative to mandatory filing of town council opinions with the town clerk be amended to bifurcate said opinions between matters subject to attorney-client privilege and those matters of general interpretation that should be available to the public for purposes of transparency and consistency in the application of bylaws and statutes.
Okay, is there a motion for number 6?
So moved.
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. Thank you. Is there any discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? It's unanimous. Number 7, Mr. Hall.
Number 7, I can read it, but I would just note prior to that, based upon my conversations with town council, and it's my understanding that the town clerk also had communications with council, it's his opinion that the animal control officer does already have the authority to issue citations as noted here. So in his opinion, does not need to be further modification, but to read it into the record, Inhabitant Bylaw, Chapter 5, Section 27, the Bylaw Review Committee recommends that if Chapter 5, Section 27 does not already grant the Animal Control Officer the right to enforce by issuance of citation all provisions of Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 140, relative to the ownership and possession of dogs, specifically MGL Chapter 140, Section 174E, relative to tethering, and 174F, relative to keeping a dog in a hot vehicle, then it should be amended to do so. Consultation with town council is recommended to determine the proper course of action. So, again, council has indicated in his opinion that the animal control officer already has that authority.
Okay, so we'll take no action. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Motion's made. Is it-
Second.
And seconded. Any discussion?
Yeah, just a question on it. I understand that hot temperatures and, how about, maybe it's in there, I haven't read the Massachusetts general laws for this, cold temperatures. I mean, sometimes the weather gets awfully cold in New England. Is that working both ways with this?
It's a good
You know,
question.
'cause-
I don't know if there's a subsection that deals with cold temperatures or not. I would have to check. I just don't know.
Sometimes you listen to the weather report and they say, don't bring your dogs out or your animals outside because of the cold temperatures. And sometimes you see people out there who tie their dog up and go back in the house and leave the dog outside. And they do the same thing in hot weather too. So I just thought I'd throw that out there. Maybe the animal control officer can address that issue. I would hope he would be, or she would be looking at both ways.
Thank you, Mr. Karen. So could we have Mr. Sullivan look into that for us?
Yeah.
We have a motion and a second to take no action on recommendation number 8. All in favor? Excuse me, number 7. It was unanimous.
All right, so next one
What,
is
number
number
8?
8. Inhabitant bylaw, Chapter 5, Section 27.5, exclusion of dogs from town property adjacent to the water. The Bylaw Review Committee recommends that Chapter 5, Section 27F be amended to strike the language, quote, "or town property adjacent to the water," end quote, thereby allowing properly leashed dogs to be on town property that is not adjacent to the water throughout the year.
Okay, is there a motion?
I'll make the motion.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion's made and seconded. Any discussion?
Yeah, just
Mr. Kyra.
quick discussion on it. It says, the bylaw says, no dog shall be allowed on public beach or town property adjacent to water from May 1st to October 1st each year. So now, are we're eliminating that May 1st, October 1st as well in this? Is that whole line gone? Because it's not, the only line that they're eliminating is town property adjacent to water.
McCoy, you want to answer for the committee?
I don't know if I'm going to be able to answer for the full committee. I know there were some questions. I know there was a couple of ladies that came in that live in the area, showed concerns with their small dogs, and we were a little compassionate towards them. And, I may have felt a little differently, but, if that's what we're going to do, that's what we're going to do.
I mean, I interpret it as meaning that the restriction for the beach is still that time frame that Mr. Kyra referenced, that it's just allowing properly leashed animals to have access to non-beach areas adjacent to the water, like the neighborhood surrounding it.
Okay, I just want to clarify, that's all.
Yep, absolutely. Is that clarified?
Yeah.
Okay.
Fine.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? It's unanimous.
So, just to reiterate, so will the bylaw now read, no dog shall be allowed on a public beach from May 1st to October 1st each year? Because right now, the way it reads is that, or the way it read, was no dog shall be allowed on public beach or town property adjacent to water. So now are we allowing dogs on the public beach from November to April? I don't think dogs should be allowed on public beach.
Does any member of the
yeah.
committee want to clarify?
I thought it was year-round, wasn't it?
That's what I thought.
That's what I thought.
Obviously, we need to table this for the next meeting.
I
Get more
I just don't think that
clarification.
dogs should be allowed on the public beach.
Yeah.
But the way
I'm with
it's
you on that, yeah.
determined.
I agree.
Okay.
Yeah. Maybe a little more
I
clarity
think
on
there
this.
is,
Unless you just
Okay.
do away with from May 1st to October 1st each year and just use the bylaw as no dog shall be allowed on a public beach, period.
I guess as I understand it, and I was not a participant in the meeting, so I can't, I would have to defer to the committee, but my understanding was the intent, for example, at Silver Lake, was to allow for individuals with leashed dogs to perhaps be in the area that is near the fishing pier, but not at the pier area, or, not an area that is within the beach itself.
I gotta be honest, I kinda wrestle with that, and I do agree with you, Mr. Carr. I wasn't really crazy about the idea of having a dog on the beach, because obviously for safety reasons, I know a couple of nice elderly ladies came in and talked about it, and so I thought we were trying to accommodate them in a certain area, but the way I'm looking at it, I have to agree with Mr. Carr on that one,
All right, so here's the way I see it. We have voted for it unanimously, number 8, which we can still get some more clarification from the committee, okay? It can be placed on the warrant because it passed. When the time comes for this body to approve the town warrant for the town meeting, if we feel we want to strike that, we can do so at that time. So right now, it's passed. We'll get more clarification, and correct me if I'm wrong, in a coming weeks, when we approve the warrant, it could be stricken if we find more information and we decide we want to eliminate that article. Is that correct?
Yeah, sure.
That's right, so the board will be presented with a draft of the articles to go to town meeting, and if at that time the board decides to not go forward with this article, then we would need to know. The warrant ultimately has to be signed by the Board of Selectmen, I believe, on the 9th of March or thereabouts, March 9th. So,
So it could be stricken or it could be amended at that time.
well, we wouldn't want to be, on the March 9th meeting, ideally, you want to have a warrant that can literally be signed that night, because then it has to be posted. So any changes should happen at board meetings prior to March 9th.
Okay, so the bottom line is that we're hoping to get just a little more clarification. It's been supported tonight. Mr. De Palma, do you want to add to that?
I apologize, I spoke incorrectly earlier. We did vote to allow dogs on the beach in the off-season. It's just, we were concerned with the summer months and everything when people are down there. And that's how we addressed it also.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so again, we've supported it here this evening. It will be placed in the form of an article. If any member feels like we need to address it at a future meeting, we can do so. Is everybody comfortable with that?
Yeah, tell me, can we take a motion to rescind what we just voted on and then re-vote?
We certainly can do that. My fear is, I don't think we need to really go through that. I think if we get the clarification, Mr. De Palma has provided some already, that if we don't feel that we're comfortable with it, at the next meeting, I would imagine before then, we'll be presented with some type of draft articles for these.
Yeah, it may not be at the meeting on the 10th. I still got to work through them all, but
Sort of near
But,
future.
Mr. Chair, did the town manager say at that time we could not amend them? Is that what
no,
I heard you
I'm saying
correctly?
that on March 9th, the Board of Selectmen will need to sign the warrant, the official warrant for posting. And so it would not be, it's going to be problematic from a timing standpoint if the board is looking to make amendments to that warrant on that date. The board would need to make any changes known either at your meeting, certainly no later than the meeting of the February 24th.
So you'll be presenting these articles to us on the 24th for us to make amendments to them?
Yeah, if at that time, then you are looking to make amendments, we can certainly accommodate them and then have the final document available on March 9th.
Okay, everybody comfortable there? All right, we'll move to the final, the ninth recommendation from the committee.
The 9th is a noise bylaw. The bylaw review committee recommends that the town of Wilmington adopt a construction noise bylaw using the attached draft, which was prepared by Police Chief Joseph Desmond, as a framework for the bylaw.
Okay, is there a motion?
So moved.
Motion's been made. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Seconded, thank you. Any discussion? Mr. Eaton?
Yeah, so I know that included in the recommendations was a draft bylaw. Where I think, and I know I spoke to this a few weeks ago when we were discussing this, but I think that really mainly two things. I think limiting it only to construction is, I think, unnecessarily narrow. And I think we need a little bit more in terms of actual standards. So I think there are certainly times of the day in which a certain volume of noise would be not considered a nuisance, and other times of the day where the exact same volume of noise would not be considered, the opposite would be true. So I think something happens at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, people might be able to shrug off and not really be inconvenienced by it, but if it happens at 2 o'clock in the morning, certainly that would not be the case. I look at the inhabitant bylaws in Billerica, and they actually have, and I know that the draft that was provided in here does have different time standards, but this is only specific to construction. In Billerica, there's a daytime level, which is 7 a.m. to 10 p.m., and a nighttime level, which is 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. There's also different and I'm not as familiar with the technical measurements, but there's actual sound standards that are used for, that are acceptable in each segment, so during the day and during the night. And there's also different acceptable levels that are for residential zones versus commercial zones. So I know I'm rambling on a little bit, but I think that if a noise is loud enough so that it is interfering with someone's quiet enjoyment of their property, I don't think that they particularly care whether it's construction or whether it's something different. I think that it would make sense to put in measurable standards, both in time, because I think that is a variable, and also the actual noise standards, the volume of the noise. So I think both for Billerica and Tewksbury, I know that the purpose was very clear. It was for man-made noises and noises created by persons. I think it was the phrase in the Billerica bylaws. And I would hope that we would be able to go forward with a noise bylaw that really is more indiscriminate of the source of the noise, so long as it's something that is caused by someone who could then be stopped from doing it. Because again, if I'm woken up at 2 o'clock in the morning and we don't have a noise bylaw, and I know that we can rely on some of the state regulations for it, but I think there's certainly reason that other communities have enacted their own noise bylaws. If it's not caused by construction, I'm going to be just annoyed at the town because there's a failure of our town bylaws to contemplate a non-construction source of noise at an inappropriate time.
Mr. Chairman, to Mr. Eaton, does that noise bylaw include babies?
Right, there's
That'll
no
be coming in
bylaw
about
against
a
those.
couple of
buddy.
days.
Right, yeah, right.
Couple of hours.
I think the baby's already been born.
Is that a motion to adjourn?
The question I have, I don't, unless I didn't read it carefully enough, I don't see any hours listed. You know, no, did I miss it? I see the draft,
Yeah,
but I
all
don't
right.
see where there's,
Through you, Mr. Chair. Through you, Mr. Chair, there is, but it's performing construction. It's, no person shall perform any construction within town except between the following hours, except that setup and delivery may take place as early as 6 a.m., Monday through Friday, So,
I think he's missing, I'm missing that page.
I'm missing that
Mr.
pa-
Guy.
okay.
I'm also
miss-
missing
I'm missing that page.
Yeah, because that.
How did Mr. Eaton get the page and no one else
Yeah,
did?
how did that work out?
see, if you got the whole thing, you'd be much more upset about this.
Must be
So
on
we're
the
missing
iPad.
that
It
page.
still doesn't include babies, though.
Yeah.
Then we get dates in it.
What is your point of order?
With regard to this article, and with regard to the specific language about construction, it may be deemed that repairing a water main or addressing the construction of a telephone pole if a car hits it may be deemed construction, so you might want to think twice about voting on this article and prohibiting somebody from doing construction to fix a broke water main, telephone pole, or anything else that might occur. Or maybe at One Treasure Hill, when a
Thank you
guy
very much,
excavates
Mr.
material and it
Thank you.
blows out and floods out the street.
Okay, noted, thank you. Is there any further discussion here
Mr.
on number
Chair,
9? Yes.
Just to respond to that, there is a language in here that permits, in the instances that you've stated, that if there's construction for repair in that regard, that this doesn't take effect. So, DPW and emergency crews of that nature, this would not be a part of that.
And, Mr. Chair, if I could just share, since I know some of my colleagues are missing this information as well, Mr. Eaton has the hours on his copy, and its setup and delivery may begin as early as 6:30 a.m., and then Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 6 p.m., Saturdays, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., and Sundays and holidays, none. So just that there are hours provided.
Okay, one more time, if you may.
Sure, so it's hours, no person shall perform any construction within the town except between the following hours, except for setup and delivery may take place as early as 6:30 a.m., Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 6 p.m., Saturdays, 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., and Sundays and holidays, none.
Thank you.
Very good.
Okay, I believe we have a motion and a second, and we're continuing discussion. Is there any further discussion here?
I'd make a motion to amend the motion itself to ask town council to draft a noise bylaw that is broader in scope and indiscriminate as to source so long as it is man-made and with measurable time and volume levels for our consideration. I think the draft as written is a good start, but I think that we can and should be coming up with something that is more specific and enforceable.
Can I ask a question through the chair?
Oh, just, if I may, we have a motion.
Oh, sorry.
Would anybody like to second it for discussion for an amendment?
I'll second.
Seconded. Discussion, Ms. O'Mahony?
So through the chair to the chief, how do you measure, I know it's like decibels is kind of the scientific measurement, but how as law enforcement do you measure what's,
There's actually devices, Andover has one where they will come out and actually, aim the device where the noise is coming from, and it'll give you a reading.
does the town of Wilmington already have such a device?
I believe the town, through you, Mr. Chair, I believe that the building inspector may have one. I know I've spoken to Ms. Newhouse about that, and I know that she has been out to at least one resident's house to try and conduct sound measurements that were happening beyond midnight. But with only the state regulations, it was not anything that could be acted upon.
She has been able to borrow one from the DEP.
Okay.
And, Mr. Chair, just to follow, and now that I see these time limitations, in the summer, it's light until 8 o'clock at night. I mean, you have some construction people that want to work until 8 o'clock at night, and there are some people that can only work on Sundays and holidays. So to say that you can't build a house, or you can't have the plumber come in or the electrician come in on a Sunday because that's the only time he can do it, I find that kind of difficult to put that.
I think what we're
Put
looking
that
at, if I
on.
could sit, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. McCoy?
I think what we're looking at, I understand what you're saying, Mr. Kyra, but obviously if a plumber, electrician's gonna do work, it's gonna be on the inside. You're not gonna hear any of this noise on the outside at an extreme level. We're talking about, actual construction noise. And I
Well-
don't see,
This includes plumbing and electricians, and I agree with you, they do their
work
work on the
inside,
inside,
yeah.
but
I don't have a
it
problem with somebody
includes
coming to,
their,
I don't have a problem with somebody
their
coming to do work at 7 at night, electrician or plumber, you're not gonna even hear them inside the house. I don't have a problem with that.
Okay, so we have a motion for an amendment. It's been seconded. Is there any further discussion on Mr. Eaton's amendment to this recommendation?
can we just hear that again, the amendment, please?
Mr. Eaton?
Yeah, so my amendment is to ask town council to draft a noise bylaw that is indiscriminate as to source of the noise, except that it be man-made, and also with measurables in terms of the times, so nighttime versus daytime, acceptable levels, as well as volume levels. So I know that I have the Billerica noise bylaw in front of me now. They have DBA is their system of measurement for it. So I imagine it's decibel something, but again, I'm not, this is not my field of expertise.
Does that clarify?
That's great.
Okay. Any further discussion on the amendment? Okay, all those in favor of Mr. Eaton's amendment? All opposed? The amendment fails. We're back to the original motion. And second. Is there any further discussion before the vote?
So it is to accept the
Recommended?
recommended
Correct.
draft.
Yes.
I think my concern, I just want to kind of flesh this out a little bit more, because I understand what Mr. Eaton's intent is with his amendment, but my concern is measuring it without the proper equipment, and then opening kind of a can of worms to having to make sure that proper equipment is available. I think, we rely on, you play out the scenario, law enforcement's going to be responding to a call of a complaint of man-made noise. And I think we should allow them the discretion of determining if that man-made noise is actually disruptive to the neighborhood as a whole, and not just an electrician inside a house banging in a hammer. So I understand amending it to indiscriminate as to the source and being man-made, but I think having it include some type of measurable volume level when we don't currently have the ability to measure the volume level, kind of sets up our law enforcement to not be able to enforce the bylaw we were asking to be amended.
Point.
One of the other issues, it just addresses construction and demolition. Does it include landscapers? And lawnmowers that they use and their digging apparatus as well? Because I think that they make a lot of noise on a Sunday and a Saturday morning when they get going, so.
Mr. De Palma?
We addressed all that when we were discussing all this, and we felt it was best to have the discretion of law enforcement, of the police department, looking at each individual situation. If you're gonna talk lawnmowers and things like that, shut the town down. And say, no talking, no speaking or anything. This is for the construction people.
Landscapers, Mr. DePaul.
Landscapers. This is for the construction workers out there that are building a home, that are tearing a home down, that are, whatever they're doing, making loud noises. Everyone expects them during the day. But when it comes down to something, usually around supper time, 5, 6, 7 o'clock, people like to slow down a little. They have children that they're trying to get cleaned up, get their schoolwork done, get them to bed. And when we looked at it in those scenarios too. As far as any other noise issues that are being brought up, the town has enough in their bylaws to cover everything else at the discretion, again, of law enforcement. If we get too tight with these things, all it's gonna do is cause controversy. Right now, the way it sits, with this law, if a complaint is made, a cruiser could go to a home and say, hey, you're not supposed to be working now. Case closed. That's it, shut it down, we'll give you time to shut down. If a complaint's made during a storm, for instance, that someone's making a lot of noise and you go out there and it's a generator being run, that's a different scenario. But all this was concerned, what this is concerned is people saying they're tired of always having construction going on all the time in the town, whether it's their neighbor or someplace else. And that's the only reason it was addressed by us was by someone who did make a complaint. And then it was brought to our attention. As far as, you're getting to the point where you're getting too particular and too fussy with times, with decimals and everything else. You get someone in there that's cutting his lawn, and someone calls up and complains he's got a loud lawnmower. And you go out there and hit the thing, and it says, well, you're above the decibels. So what are you gonna do? You're gonna warn him first, I'm assuming, before you give him any type of citation. But also, you gotta consider equipment, even our personal equipment, is loud. I would assume my lawnmower might be louder than yours, or yours louder than mine. Your leaf blower, your snow blower. You have to have some liberty in there. If you don't, you're just gonna cause more controversy. Thank you.
Thank you. Chief?
Chairman, if I may, we looked at a variety of bylaws. We looked at Billerica's, we looked at Reading, Tewksbury. Some of them are 10 pages long. Some of them are 1 page, and they're very broad with a lot of discretion, to the police department. So, this was a stab at this. We've never had one. Absent any kind of bylaw, the most we have is disturbing the peace, which is difficult. It's a criminal charge. It's not an easy thing to get, because obviously it's reasonable to assume that people can work on their property. So this was an attempt. We did a la carte and kind of picked the things, giving discretion, because we don't want to be overly specific in these. But again, it was an attempt. Certainly the board can make changes. The townspeople can make changes. There's a lot of stakeholders involved with a noise ordinance. We understand that, but it was our mandate was to come up with at least a draft to be worked on. So that's what this is.
Thank you, Chief. Is there any further discussion from board members? Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve the recommendation number 9. All those in favor? All opposed? Motion passes 3-2. Okay. So, in conclusion, the board has moved forward 7 of the 8 recommendations. 1 we've ruled we're not going to take any action on based on town council's recommendation. So 7 of the 8 recommendations will be put forward as articles for the coming town meeting. I would imagine we'll get some more clarity on each one, and we'll get a chance to see what that article actually looks like before March 9th, I think you said was the
Yes.
date, when this board has to vote on approving the warrant for town meeting. So that's how that looks going forward. Once again, we want to thank the 9 members of the committee who spent an awful lot of time, putting a lot of time and effort and energy into these recommendations, and I applaud you on your efforts. Again, pleased to announce that 7 of the 8 recommendations have been adopted here this evening.
Thank you
Okay.
very much.
And now our final board to consider item. Mr. Hall?
Next is a request from Tina Stewart, Library Director, requesting authorization to use the Swain Common for the following 2 events this summer. A performance of Shakespeare's Much Ado About Nothing presented by the Brown Box Theater on Thursday, August 13, 7 p.m. with the use of the Swain Green from 4 p.m. to 11 p.m. And then the annual Summer Bash on Friday, August 14th from 5:30 to 7 p.m.
Okay, is there a motion?
So moved.
Motion's been made, is there a second?
Second.
Seconded. All in favor? It's unanimous. Okay, public comments. Sir,
Good evening. I'd like to just offer,
name and address, please?
I gave it to you already, but I'm still
If
Kevin
you could
McDonald,
repeat it for the record, the
still 140
secretary.
Andover Street.
Thank you.
I have a few questions, but I'd just like to start by beginning to offer some opinions and ideas on our elderly housing needs and our senior center. As you know, the town purchased the St. Dorothy property. Prior to the town purchasing the property, it was a non-taxable property. It remains non-taxable where the town owns it now. And it's very strategically located on Route 38 to be a revenue-generating piece of property. And this week I had some thoughts on what we might be able to do with that property. And I'll just give you this company for example. Very prominent company, highly respected company, highly successful company out of Woburn, whose owner now gives away millions of dollars a year, I believe, and that's the Cummings property, Cummings Corporation. They're a company that has basically their own owner's project management team, their own architects, their own designers, their own superintendents, own in-house professionals and craftsmen. And one of the things that I thought was if the town could explore offering this property to somebody like that, where we give the property away. In return, the company builds out retail space on the first floor and elderly housing on the top 2 or 3 floors, along with providing a senior center for us. This, I believe, could be done at no cost to the town, no need for a feasibility study, since a company like that can provide all the intellectual property and the necessary engineering. And in return, the town would meet its need for elderly housing, address the desire to have a senior center, and can have a revenue generating facility, if it would so choose that, depending on how it would work in the model of the company, to be able to pull it off. Or maybe we could even designate it a tax-free zone, depending on what type of negotiation could be worked out with a company like that, where the company's benefit would be coming from all the commercial rental income generation. And so I don't know if there's anybody on this board who would be willing to put that on for an article, maybe have the town manager have its planning department come down with a set of plans that show the St. Dorothy's property and any abutting town-owned land, where we could actually offer to residents input, what they would suggest there, and maybe even invite some of these companies in to have a discussion. And the other thing I thought was the church has a rectory, and it doesn't look like it's in that great a shape. And so one of the things that we could even offer the town, if the church would be willing to add that property to the property and work something out with the developer where they offered a couple units back to the church as residences. And so those are my thoughts this week on that. Like maybe we could have a discussion later in the meeting to see if somebody would be willing to put forth an article or put forth a agenda item, maybe the next meeting, to discuss that. And I had some other questions that don't really pertain to that, but I guess maybe through you, Mr. Chair, maybe Mrs. O'Mahony might be able to answer this. We had a lawsuit relative to the hockey rink. Can you tell us if any of the town's insurance companies paid out on settling that lawsuit?
How would I know that information, Mr. McDonald?
Because
What?
you're a select person, selectwoman, selectman?
But how would I specifically, out of all of this board, be the one to answer that question? I have no idea, is my answer.
Okay, I just thought you were on the recreation or the hockey ice rink committee.
I'm
and
not on it. I'm not on that committee.
Okay, I thought you were, but is
And Mr. McDonald,
is anybody aware
just to
of
be,
that?
excuse me, just to be clear, I have known Mrs. O'Mahony to be someone that if you ask her a question, she will most certainly look into it. But just to spot her with any type of question is, you know,
Well, I
you
thought
can't
she was
expect her to
all
have
over-
the number off the top of her
I thought she was all over
head.
the hockey rink, but that's all right.
No, you
I
thought- no.
apologize.
I'm not on that
That's
committee.
Can anybody, the manager, tell us if our insurance company has paid out any money to settle that lawsuit?
The answer is no, because we were not sued specifically.
Any other questions?
Yeah, and we were told tonight that we're hiring additional employees, and in the past, for the, I guess for the benefit of the people at home who might not know this, that the town, with regard to employee health benefits, is self-insured. And the last time I asked the manager, before we collect any money from stop-loss insurance, it was stated that our deductible has risen to $150,000. So when we hire additional employees, we need to keep in mind that those employees and their family members are covered by the town's insurance, the town's responsibility to pay for their claims out of pocket before the insurance company kicks in, per claim. In other words, if somebody breaks their arm, that's one claim. If somebody breaks their toe, it's another claim. But before any money gets paid out from an insurance company, the town is on the hook for the first $150,000. So, Mr. Hull, can you tell us if that deductible is still that, or has it risen above $150,000?
I would want to defer on that. I don't recall, is it 175 now, or is it 150? I just don't remember. I think it's 175.
Certainly would want to check it.
The reason why I ask is, it seems like we continually gift the insurance company higher deductibles so that they're less likely to pay. And to hire more employees without this board taking a really close look at that, without having an agenda item that really digs into that, maybe call a public hearing so we have input from the people in town before we go hire 8 new firemen instead of subcontracting the ambulance out, additional police officers, additional people in the school system. We probably should take a look at what we're paying for employee health benefits out of pocket, not even talking about the insurance company. Lay it out for the people in town. Show them what we have to pay for insurance. Show them what our deductible is. Show them over the years how much it's gone up. Before Mr. Hull was manager, the deductible was $50,000. So I guess I just kind of have a problem really seeing this as kind of a gift to the insurance companies, knowing that we pay millions of dollars every year. And in addition to giving them
Mr.
the
McDonald, excuse me,
additional.
if I could just interrupt, I want to let you know you have about a minute left out of respect for anybody else who might want to speak. So,
Okay, well, I'll take that minute to ask you, Mr. Chairman, if you would be willing, for the benefit of the entire community, to have an agenda item that explores that and digs into that issue prior to the town meeting.
Mr. McDonald, every meeting we have explores every possibility that benefits this town. Thank you. Anybody else would like to speak? Thank you very much. Anybody else?
Thank you very much.
Thank you, appreciate that. I actually thought the kids were wonderful.
Excellent, and that really addresses the insurance output that the people of
Good.
Wilmington are paying out.
It helped ensures me that this is a wonderful community. Thank you. Sir?
Ethan Sawyer, 58 Lawrence Street. I guess I've just been a little bit confused about why the town hall and the school administration building is being presented at this point in time when we have a lot of the other building projects that need to be done. And I guess the only reason that I was able to identify was, had to do with siting and phasing. I mean, I know that there's some issues with town hall. But, I don't really consider spending between $20 and $30 million for town hall, school administration building, a conservative approach to the budget when we have so much up in the air with the fire substation, really not knowing what's going on with the schools yet. I think it's a good plan to have a better overall plan for the schools, so I'm looking forward to that. And I know that there's a lot of variability in there. We're talking probably over $100 million for the school construction costs, and maybe we could get, 40+ million of that covered through the state, but we don't know yet. So to take on a $20 to $30 million project seems like too much. And if
Just to
it's
be
really-
clear, I think the manager's proposing a certain amount of money for a feasibility, not 20 or 30 million, just to be clear on that, right?
Sure, so I think $1 million for a project that is not appropriate yet is
955,000, just to be,
955.
Thank you.
I like to talk in round numbers with this kind of stuff, makes it easier. So roughly $1 million to come up with a plan for something that isn't really, it's not the appropriate time for it yet. I mean, certainly at some point it'll have to be addressed. But when it comes to just siting and phasing issues, I grew up in Malden, and they rebuilt all the schools right around 2000. And basically, they leveraged the parks, so it was always like, you build a new school in a park, you need park space, and then they would tear down the old school and put the park back up again. You know, and I know right over here, we have a lot of park space, obviously it's used. We also just recently turned down the opportunity to license fields from Textron at a cost of 250 grand or something like that. It's a lot less than $20 million. So I think if it's really siting, there's some better solutions, and we could not spend the money for the town hall yet, until we really know what we're up against with the schools.
just,
But I do
if I could just
understand-
interrupt there
yeah.
one time, I think I want to clarify on the Textron property, the lease was proposed for $1.
It was a license.
It was a, yeah.
Free license with, like, we do the maintenance.
Correct.
Which was, I think it would be about 350. I don't want to
Something like
nitpick
that,
it,
yeah, 250,
but yeah, it's still a
400,
significant amount of money for something that they
Yeah.
could
But
just turn
the
around and
point
say.
there being that we would basically be spending town tax dollars on
Right.
property that we don't own. And I don't know about you, but I don't like that idea.
I don't either, but if it's, 2 or 3 years so that we have some wiggle room as far as space, if it's a siting and phasing and lack of space issue, that's cheap space. If we're gonna do $20 million to free up this space, it's a lot of money.
Mr. Chair, where's $20 million coming from?
I'm not sure.
Facilities master plan said 20, and then I think in the presentation you had that was updated by, I forget what the name of the agency was, they had 29 million.
So the
Without a
initial,
feasibility study, I don't know that we can throw those numbers out.
so
Well, I mean,
the,
but that's the end goal. Feasibility study is to identify how and where we're gonna spend this $20 to $30 million. So it's not pulling it out of the air.
so the numbers came from first, the feasibility master plan identified the potential cost of a school-town admin building as something in the order of just under 20 million. The more recent number that I obtained was $29.2 million. So those, again, are just ballpark numbers. Obviously, nothing is cast in stone until a feasibility study is done, but those are the potential numbers.
So I guess that's the point, is that I feel like the $1 million could be used to shore up the town hall, and even if we get, 5 to 10 more years out of it, I think that's money better spent. And if we need to free up space, I think, like I said, we have parks right here that, because I know in the facilities master plan, they came up with a way to site it and phase it so that you actually could have both buildings at the same time. That was the primary comment that I had. And I guess, maybe just as a follow-up to each of the selectmen, I think the question really has to be, is this the project that should get taken on first with everything that we have going on? I know it's gonna go to the annual town meeting, but I know that, the selectmen, the people in the town look to you for some guidance on this. And so I think that we really have to look at it if this is the project that should be done right now, because it's a big piece of the total cost, and I think it's just too big of a piece to take on first. And it's not the priority either. We've all kind of talked about that, so.
Thank you for your comments. Anybody else like to be heard? Ma'am?
My name is Janice Sawyer. I live at 58 Lawrence Street. And I was hoping to get a little bit of clarification for how the the voting for the feasibility study for the senior center versus the feasibility study for town hall admin building would be put forward, because it seemed like at the meeting that it was presented, the feasibility study money was presented at town meeting as though it was going to be a standalone warrant at town meeting. But I didn't get the impression that that's what the feasibility study was, how it was gonna be presented for the town hall school administration building. So I'm wondering if someone could clarify that for
Sure.
me?
So in each case, both with the senior center and with a town school admin building, if there was, the decision of the Board of Selectmen is to place articles on the town warrant, there would be one article seeking to raise and appropriate or borrow $650,000 for the purpose of a design and OPM services related to a senior center. There would be a separate standalone article to see if the town will raise and appropriate or borrow $955,000. So they would be handled in the exact same way, and people would vote on each one independently.
That wasn't clear when they were presented. The other thing I just wanted to ask was, it was mentioned tonight that part of the reason that a feasibility study, we were not at that point for a feasibility study for the North Wilmington substation was because a plot of land hadn't been identified. And yet, a plot of land hasn't been identified for either the senior center or the town hall administration building either. So I don't understand why that would be a reason to not go ahead with a feasibility study when part of the feasibility study is to define a place where it would go.
Yeah, sure, if I can respond to that. I think, to answer your question, it's a great question. For the feasibility studies for the town hall, the potential of a new town hall school admin, and the potential of a new senior center, more than likely, the possibility of those projects will end up on a town-owned piece of property already. In the case of a substation, in my mind, a substation will probably end up on a property that we don't own to date. So we can't go in and study someone else's property if we don't own it. My hope is that we'll be able to acquire a property through negotiations so that we can, for the purpose of a substation. So I don't know if that makes sense or not, but the point is we can't just go around doing a study on private property.
Okay. Thank you.
Otherwise, we'd have one, I can assure you that.
And I just have one last question. Do other towns or cities, is it typical to have school administration and town hall housed together in one building? Is that typical, or, you know?
I hesitate to say that it's typical. It may not be, it may not be prevailing, but there are certainly instances where town and school are housed in the same location. I know the town of Franklin, for example, some years ago, needed to address their situation, and they have a school-town facility, and they are combined, and there were other towns I don't know of offhand. I'm sure that there are others, but I just can't think of them offhand. So we're not pioneering in this effort, but I can't say if it's a prevailing approach.
Thank
Okay, thank you. Anyone else like to be heard?
I'll let
Sir?
everyone else speak. I just want to offer a few suggestions on the fire substation. If you feel as though there is an immediate need for emergency response in North Wilmington, I offered it at the last meeting that we could have a garage bay at the DPW, and it could be brought up to speed immediately. There's officers there. We're looking to rescue people from smoke inhalation, accidents, heart attacks, strokes, whatever the need may be. So if you feel as though the need is there now, and it's life or death, I don't think you should be waiting for a feasibility study. I don't think you should be waiting for a town meeting, and I don't think you should be waiting for anything else. I think you better get an emergency vehicle down there, get that garage bay open, and frankly, my personal opinion is, when you have a DPW building that has 30,000, 40,000 gallons of fuel right beside our water well field, when there's massive blasting, I don't think it's a good idea. I don't think hydraulic hoses breaking, fuel leaks, filling or anything like that that could get into our water well field is something that we should be tolerating. And I think that the recycling center would be the place to put our garage for our DPW, and I think a very cost-effective way to address a substation would be the DPW building. We own it. It would take relatively little money to be brought up to speed. And frankly, if you feel as though there is an immediate need, I think you guys should probably have an article at the next meeting to act on this. You know,
Well, Mr.
there are
McDonald.
ways to fund things. There are ways to fund things. You're looking for a school administration building. I identified a building last meeting that's highly contaminated, where town workers are going in. It's right beside the Congregational Church. We have probably hundreds of lots in town that have no strategic value for town purposes, that are scattered lots, that in this market, in this real estate market where the demand for living in Wilmington is sky high, where the prices are pretty much maxed out, it would probably behoove us to take a look at selling some scattered lots around town, taking that money, and if we need to build a school administration building, build it with those funds and not tax people.
Okay.
And maybe we could even enter into some type of an agreement with a developer where he's given the land with the deal that maybe you're gonna get 10 lots, but the deal is you build a school administration building or whatever else we need.
Okay. Mr. McDonald, you and I actually agree that there's an immediate need for a substation. Where we disagree is that you believe the town government should just bypass town meeting, and I don't think that's ever appropriate, so, thank you.
I didn't say that myself. I just said,
Yeah, you did.
I did not say that.
Okay. All right,
That there's an immediate
we're gonna
need.
move on. Thank you very much. Okay, the next item of business on the agenda is announcements. Are there any announcements?
Just want to take a moment to acknowledge our colleague, my colleague who has to sit next to me at every meeting is going through a huge life experience tomorrow, and we're very excited, and we can't wait to hear that his wife and new baby are happy and healthy and have arrived into the world. So we congratulate Mrs. Eaton and Mr. Eaton, and if you look a little sleep deprived at the next meeting, I'll try to keep you awake.
Thank you. I tried to drag out this meeting as long as I possibly could to just delay the inevitable, so thank you.
There's no doubt about it. We wish you well. We're praying for your family, and we hope everything goes well.
Thank you all.
Any other announcements? I'll just conclude with that I joined Mr. Eaton and Mr. Kyra at the MMA conference this past weekend, and it was very informative. A couple of the things that stood out to me were our presentation on the concerns with trash, as the manager outlined a little bit in his presentation tonight, but certainly that's a major concern for all municipalities here in the Commonwealth. We had an opportunity to hear the governor speak on some of the initiatives he's putting forth, and I was also pleased to join my colleagues in voting against the proposed gas tax. We were one of the few communities to do so. I want to applaud Mr. Kyra, who stood up and actually spoke up against the proposed article for the gas tax, but unfortunately we were defeated, but thought it was worth mentioning.
Just to clarify, MMA is not mixed martial arts.
Definitely not the three of us, no, but Mass Municipal Association, Mass Selectmen's Association Conference. Any other announcements? Okay. Any new business this evening? Okay, seeing none, we'll move into important dates.
Important dates, so the Finance Committee meeting start tomorrow, Town Hall, Room 9, 7 PM, regarding the fiscal '21 budget overview, revenue, and general government. January 30, Finance Committee, Town Hall, Room 9, 7 PM, planning, conservation, building inspector, Board of Appeals, and Board of Health. February 4th, Finance Committee, Town Hall, Department of Public Works, 7 PM. February 6th, Finance Committee, Town Hall, 7 PM, Veterans Services, Elderly Services. February 7th, last day to submit petition warrant articles for inclusion on the warrant for the annual town meeting on May 2nd, 2020. February 10th, Board of Selectmen's meeting here at 7 PM. February 11th, Finance Committee, Room 9, 7 PM, Public Buildings Department. February 12th, last day to register to vote in the presidential primary. Town Clerk's office will be open until 8 PM. February 13th, Finance Committee, Town Hall, Room 9, Public Library, Recreation, Historical Commission. February 24th, early voting, February 24th, 28th, early voting, auditorium, 8:30 AM to 4:30 PM. Thursday, February 27th, 8:30 AM to 7 PM. February 24th, Board of Selectmen's meeting on 7 PM. February 25th, Finance Committee, Public Safety Building, 7 PM. Public Safety, Police Department, Public Dispatch and Fire. February 27th, Finance Committee, here at the Town Hall, 7 PM, Town Clerk and IT. March 3rd, Presidential Primary, polls open at 7 AM, close at 8 PM. March 3rd, Finance Committee, Shawshene Tech, 7 PM. And then March 5th, Finance Committee, Wilmington High School, 7 PM.
Okay, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion's been made by Mr. Eaton.
Second.
All in favor? It's unanimous. Good night, everyone.